Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm Susanna Brecknell. I'm from Civil Service World, and we are hosting this seminar in partnership with EduServe. We've got quite a mix of people here today. I think people who have already bought from G-Cloud, people who are planning to buy, people who are just interested to find out where G-Cloud's at and what's the direction of travel. We've got quite a good mix of speakers from supplier point of view, customer point of view. So hopefully we'll get some nice details out for you that you can take back to your organisations and really work out how you're going to get the best out of G-Cloud, Cloud Store, for your purposes. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. There's no fire alarms planned, so if the fire alarm does go off, exit out the back and down the main staircase just to your left. We're going to have a few presentations and then a coffee break, which will be held up on this floor. If you go out the back and just sort of straight ahead, there's a boardroom and there'll be coffee and refreshments in there. We won't have any Q&As at the end of presentations today, but do write down any questions and then we'll have a panel discussion at the end of the morning when you can speak to all of our speakers. I think that's all the housekeeping, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Stephen from EduServe to tell us a bit more about what we're hoping to get out of today.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Yes, I'm Stephen Butcher, Chief Executive of EduServe. Welcome. It's not one of those days, is it, where you sit here wishing you were outside? So I guess that's a good start. And kind of on that spirit, I hope you will approach today in a spirit of dedicated selfishness, looking at what you think you can get out of G-Cloud and Cloud Store. There seems to me no doubt at all that business through Cloud Store is going to grow exponentially over the next few months with increasing rapidity. We know just from the procurements we're aware of the hugely increasing amount of business that will be going through Cloud Store in the course of this year. But the question, it seems to me, that I hope we can make progress on today is about how you, addressing your individual challenges in your organisations, can take advantage of G-Cloud and Cloud Store and the effort that's gone into those initiatives and get value from them. And that's been effort, of course, both from the centre, from government, and also from suppliers. And for us, we're a medium-sized company, about 150 people, and G-Cloud's been quite a lot of work for us, making our offers clear, well-defined, and presented on G-Cloud. But it has been a great experience for us. And for us, it's a fantastic opportunity, really for the first time, I think, in reality, to compete on equal terms with the giant companies. We can't, and we probably don't want to, compete with the kind of sales and marketing and promotional and tendering spend that the very large IT service providers can throw at their relationships with organisations. We can't always, for example, in the olden days of framework agreements, sometimes those framework agreements were drawn with such a demand for breadth and scale that we weren't eligible to enter for them. And G-Cloud and Cloud Store have transformed that for us. They've enabled us to define clearly what we offer, and for that offer to be visible alongside all our competitors, big and small, in the marketplace. And I think that's transformational, and it's very important. If I'm being selfish, it's very important for us as a medium-sized IT provider. It's probably important for another reason too, because we're an unusual provider insofar as not only are we medium-sized, but we're also not-for-profit. If anyone's interested in exactly why, I'll be very happy to talk to them over coffee. But very briefly, we were spun off from the university sector in the late 90s, where we'd been a cooperative provider to the university sector. And we're now a not-for-profit governed by trustees, and our mission is IT for public good. And if we make surpluses, they're put back into our services, into investment in our services, or into, indeed, events like this, or research. Just on your chairs, a brief commercial, you'll find details of a symposium that we hold every year. This year's symposium, 16th of May, being held, I don't know where Great George Street is from here, but I guess just about over there somewhere, on new paradigm for IT, the kind of demands that we're now needing to meet in terms of big data, it might be, or new channels of engagement with clients, and so on. The full details on the website, but that's the kind of event like this which we want to put on, which we hope will take understanding forward. But back to today, I hope there will be questions. We've got a session at the end where we need to, I think, address any elephants that there are in the room around the use of G-Cloud and CloudStor, because I think it's a great opportunity, and I think in a year's time, when the question is asked, what did G-Cloud ever do for you, in true Roman style, I hope we'll be able to give very positive answers to it. We've been asking some questions, and I'm going to hand over to our business director now, Andrew, who's going to talk about some of the answers we've got to questions around what does G-Cloud mean to people at the moment. So let's kick off with that, and we'll go on from there. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'll say up front, I hate being stuck behind a podium, so if you see me walking off, somebody get back, because apparently for streaming, I've got to be here. But my natural tendency is to walk everywhere. But I was thinking on the train coming up this morning about my experience in dealing with government. I mean, I've been at EduServe 2.5 years. We deal almost exclusively in the public sector. But prior to that, I'd worked at Nokia for 10 years, predominantly again in the private sector. I remember joining EduServe and finding procurement and dealing with customers and clients in government frustratingly difficult. It was a learning curve for me in joining EduServe. And when I went back to my Nokia experience, where I dealt with government, there were sort of a couple of examples which pinpointed the extreme of how we as a vendor dealt with government. One was at the lobbying level, where we spent an awful lot of time trying to convince politicians to release 3G spectrum, and that mobile phones have no health implications for us. So we spent a lot of time doing that. But also the job I was responsible was selling security solutions from our enterprise business unit, and government was the market. And I was thinking our biggest government procurement we did as Nokia was with a government department, and the supply chain was us to a security integrator, through to a big SI who had a framework with the department in question, and then through the department. And at no point as the vendor did we actually have any conversations with the end user. We were hammered down on discount. It was a very large deal for equipment and services. We were hammered down in discount, and it was probably one of the most biggest discount deals we did. And then I couldn't tell you today whether that discount ever made its way through to the government organisation, or whether the sandwich in the middle, if you like, managed to keep that as part of their margin and things. But to me, that was almost symptomatic of where government was. And when I joined EduServe, I think it's fair to say I joined at a pretty exciting time. The coalition had come in, a new agenda was set, and I think today we're here to really talk about some of those changes that have been driven forward. And I think driven is the key. I think I'll come to it a bit later. But I think we've seen, particularly from central functions in government, a real push to try and shake things up, change things, and ultimately, hopefully, provide better tools for you to use in finding the right IT for your organisations, which is fundamentally what it's all about. So that is me. I'm Business Development Director. Predominantly, as I said, from an EduServe point of view, we deal in the public sector. Central government tends to be our core marketplace. Historically, definitely. We have relationships in government that go back 10, 15 years. And again, from an organisational point of view, it's interesting that we almost sort of span both worlds, as I would call it. The old world, which was a small number of suppliers, almost creating, owning the marketplace, to this new world we're talking about today, where you've got hundreds, possibly at some point thousands of suppliers, all visible, and talking of organisations again that you represent today. So it's a sea change, and I don't think you can underestimate that. Stephen's touched on who we are, so I'm not going to go into much detail. I don't want this to be a supplier pitch, it's really not. It's to talk about what we found in our survey. But we are not for profit. I think it gives us an advantage that we can really focus on what the market needs, what you need, what we need to be doing to drive value for you, rather than worrying about our sort of bottom line and those sorts of things. It also means we can take a very long-term view as opposed to short-term, and again that's one of the reasons we're particularly interested in conducting this survey, and that we thought there was value in trying to flesh out what was the good and the more sort of restrictive things seen at the moment in the community that you represent. What we do, we're an IT services organisation, so we provide services for the public sector around managed services, around web development, around, see I was creeping off there, around web development, around professional services, and fundamentally our goal in life is to help public sector organisations transform their IT. Bit of a grandiose statement, but fundamentally we see in a lot of organisations a lot of legacy, a lot of complexity, and I think most people at the moment want to see how they can drive cost out, get more out of their IT estate. And that often means looking at that legacy, looking at that complexity and seeing how it can be simplified, seeing how it can be changed to actually unleash its full potential. And that's where we feel that we can add most value to organisations, particularly, as I say, over long term. I think that's typically a long-term engagement rather than short-term. So that's us, that's our mission. Where we do it, it'll probably help you place us and our credentials, if you like. As I say, Department for Education is probably our longest standing relationship. Business Innovation and Skills, both those organisations, we develop their websites. We also do a significant amount of hosting, cloud technologies for them. Other government organisations, HEFKI, we developed the Unistat site for anybody with children here who are looking at university at the moment. If they use the Unistat site, that's the HESKI tool for allowing people to compare different courses and institutions. And Scottish Water, the Scottish Government have kept the Water Authority public, so again they are a public sector organisation in Scotland, and we again work with them to transform their online presence so that they could handle their kind of quite diverse community better, and that continues engagement today. And then I think the one we're particularly proud of was NHS Direct, and it's sort of symptomatic of how we as an SME have had to deal with government, in that we came together as a consortia of SMEs to deliver a solution for NHS Direct to deliver their online presence, so their sort of diagnostic tools, so you as an individual can go onto their website, plug in a bit of information, and it will point you towards where you need to go next with your ailment. So we developed those sort of tools there. A point I wanted to make about these is, and again it's an SME view of the world, I suspect, is that most of these we've had to work with other organisations, other SMEs typically, from design houses through to other technology organisations that have particular tools, and then also the big SIs. So NHS24, for example, we actually contracted through a big SI in there, and again we had to manage that sort of two-way relationship between us, the SI, and us and the end user. So dealing with government and public sector has been successful for us, but it's always been quite complicated, and I think we've probably always felt that we've never had enough visibility of the actual needs that you have. Often the needs that we've had given to us have been kind of filtered through a third party or multiple third parties, which, as I say, took me back thinking about it this morning all the way to my Nokia days, when as a vendor, even sometimes far more removed. And I think one of the things about Cloud Store, as we go through today, is hopefully for you, you may sometimes look at it and think, well, do I want all that complexity? Do I want 1,000 suppliers? But the reality, if you get your head around that and can manage that, then suddenly it really does give you an interactive, real-time marketplace in terms of what's available and competitive information, all sorts of things that perhaps you've never had before. So again, from our perspective, I think it's a wonderful opportunity just to make things better. So that's us, that's our credentials. If you go back, as I say, I've been in EduServe 2.5 years, and when I joined, I'm creeping away again, the coalition came in. We saw Francis Maude talking very animatedly about, we need to shake things up, do things differently. People in Cabinet Office saying, does it make sense for 20 suppliers to dominate the marketplace? My view, and I think I think I'm always a pragmatist in these things. IT, depending who, when, and where you're talking, IT either gets a bad name or a good name. I think the reality is always in between. I suspect that all of the people in here have probably seen some very good IT projects delivered and seen those projects deliver good value. Probably equally, we've all seen projects that haven't met expectations, and that's probably the reality of IT. And there's always reasons, and the devil's in the detail. But I think there was a view that IT is maturing, the services available are maturing, and so does it make sense for IT to be bought in the same way that has been bought historically? And so we saw the launch of G-Cloud, the cloud store, creating a marketplace. It's just celebrated its first anniversary. In parallel, we're not talking about it today, but we've seen things like the PSN start to develop. So it's a similar but different thing on the network side. Why have complex, engineered, expensive networks when you can start to use standards and multiple suppliers to create a more uniform network environment that everybody can share at a more effective price point? So again, in parallel to Cloud Store, you've got PSN developing that area. And again, I think the success is in that piece in terms of providing the connectivity. So we've had two almost different approaches through PSN and Cloud Store just to start opening up the marketplace. As I say, I've had the first anniversary. The thing I like about it, again, Stephen mentioned about being selfish about today. One of the selfish things I like about Cloud Store is I know what all our competitors are doing. It's out there. Is that advantageous to you? Absolutely. It means that we see movement in the marketplace from a price perspective. We'll respond to that. So you, in theory, should always be getting the best price available to you. If we see services developing and we think that we've got a chance to do something better or different, then we will use CloudStar to get those on there and make those available to you as soon as possible. So again, you've got this dynamic sense, whereas before, particularly under these sort of 4 or 5 plus framework contracts, does the innovation ever get in fast enough? Are you ever aware of what the innovation potentials are for your business? Sometimes yes, but possibly sometimes no. So from a supplier point of view, CloudStor is fantastic, and we use it a lot for benchmarking our own business. And as Stephen mentioned, that's big value for us. But it's also changed our culture, and I'll come on to it towards the end of my presentation. We as a supplier need to think, how can we help you best? What do we need to provide you to enable you to use these tools? And you're going to be interested later on in the day, perhaps in the panel, on those sorts of things, to get your views in terms of what you need from suppliers to make this work. So we'll certainly come back to that point. How's it working? This is my diagram. It was a representation to try and show old world versus new world, and it's sort of you can always sort of say it's not exactly like it is, but in reality, I think the shift in government IT is a move away from this kind of monolithic big SI model, supplying almost everything into a government department or agency, and moving it to a disaggregated solution where you start to pull out the commodity services, start to pull things to pieces and buy things in distinct units. So perhaps pull out your infrastructure as a service from your overall managed hosted offering and application support and those pieces. And it starts to become a different way of building these things together. So we move away from the big SI being the overall owner and controller of the IT estate to it being one probably firmly back in your hands. Could be daunting perhaps, but I think control is potentially given far back to you as the end user community. Using organisations like a service integrator and management organisation to help you with certain functions there. And I think it's for every individual organisation to determine what skills and things you need to help bring this kind of disaggregated estate together. And then service towers. Again, I think 18 months ago we first saw the signs of that with some of the big government procurements through DVLA, MOJ and those sorts of organisations. But certainly from the procurements we're now seeing through CloudStor, most organisations seem to be now following the same route of starting to pull things apart, pull things into groups where they can start to discreetly buy those things through something like a CloudStor framework. So that trend seems to be developing quite rapidly in what we see at the marketplace at the moment. So there is that move, and I put CloudStor firmly in the middle of that because I think it's an enabler. CloudStor is the thing ultimately I think that frees up that marketplace and enables you to get the information and have the process to actually manage this as effectively as you can for your organisation. So a year on, just over a year on, and Peter will talk about CloudStor, but one thing we wanted to achieve with Civil Service Live was try and understand how you felt about it. So we thought we'd conduct a survey. We went out to a large number of people in the civil service, asking a number of questions about CloudStor and its effectiveness. We got 529 responses. from 70 plus government organisations, so a very good spread, which we're very pleased with. A mix of seniority, which again is important because different things mean different things to different people. And we got some interesting results out of it. Some were ones where you think, well, yes, you'd expect that, and other ones where you thought, okay, well, what's that telling us about what we need to do over the next year in terms of pushing on with CloudStor, particularly from a supplier perspective in our case, but I guess from Peter's case in terms of the CloudStor team. In setting the scene, I think these were sort of interesting ones for us, but I think interesting for the marketplace. 39% plan to improve engagement in SMEs. Fantastic news. I mean, if you look at CloudStor today, I know that Peter, you might mention statistics when you talk, but if you look at CloudStor, it's full of SMEs. We're a member of an industry body called Intellect, and it's buzzing with SMEs, all wanting to do business with government, bring in their solutions and offerings. One example that's been quoted in the press, but I know the guy who runs their commercial arm, if you like, is Innovem, who have a collaboration suite. And I was only talking to him the other day how CloudStor has transformed his business, their business, because now they can talk to you lot and start to find out what you need and start to provide services in there. And that's the same effect for us. We're starting to get that engagement. So the improved engagement with SMEs is fantastic. We'd obviously like that to be 100%. And it may be not a topic for today, but one of the things we'd be interested in understanding is what would be the blockers in people looking at SMEs. Because we'd like to think that in most cases, an SME can provide a very agile, competitive and right-sized solution for what you need. But I'm sure there are always exceptions. But again, that was interesting. And then the other statistic, 40% of specific purchase they plan to make in G-Cloud in the next 6 to 12 months. And I think, again, I mean, Stephen alluded to the numbers and mentioned that G-Cloud has potential to grow exponentially from now on. And I think that certainly represents that. We saw what I would call, in the early days of G-Cloud, a lot of market sounding. People using CloudStor to find out what's out there. That's certainly now translating very much into, we're going to buy this stuff now, we're going to use it, we're going to deal with SMEs. One example, we were in the procurement recently. We were shortlisted to 5, and we were having a guess who the other 4 were. The good thing about the way they run, it's very open, so we knew the other 4, and they were all small SMEs. It was a 5 SME field. 3 of them we were surprised were in the race, but they were on CloudStor. They'd been chosen on value and the proposition they had, and it was fantastic to see that a large government agency was, 1, using CloudStor, but 2, really adopting let's find the best organisation with the best fit for what we need, and SMEs can do it for us. So it's a sort of a great, I think, example of how things are moving forward and working. That's something that was a big procurement. So that's where we are today, and I think we come back to those points. I'll just make sure I'm on track time-wise. Other things we found in the survey, and again, it'll be interesting during the day to get your views in terms of whether these statistics surprise you or not. I mean, you're the clients, if you like. You're the people using these services, using CloudStor, talking to organisations like us. Generally speaking, we found that IT professionals had more of an understanding of CloudStor than procurement professionals. I think, again, I was thinking about it last night. I suspect one of the reasons is, because again, I think you always need to look at yourself when you look at these things, is as a supplier, we tend to focus all our time on IT professionals, in fairness, and that may not be the right approach. But so I suspect that the reason that IT people know it best is that, 1, perhaps they've got the more immediate need, but also that they perhaps had more contact with suppliers and that sort of thing in terms of helping them understand how it could work for them. But no, that's a sort of a bit of a guess by me. But I think no, certainly in terms of how we've operated, our engagement's traditionally been with IT and sometimes procurement, and perhaps we as a supplier need to spend more time understanding the needs of procurement people. And it was interesting, a procurement we've just been through recently on CloudStor, we had to help the procurement person just find their way through the cloud. It was their first purchase through G-Cloud, and so we helped them, pointed them in the direction of the cabinet office team, and it went through smoothly. And I think they were pretty impressed with how well it worked for them, in all honesty. So again, I think it's going back to something Peter and me were talking about the other day, there's an emphasis on suppliers, just making sure that we're doing the right things and doing the right things to help you as our audience. So there is that mix, and I think moving forward we need to make sure that procurement people and IT people have the same view of what CloudStor can deliver and how it can be used, and make sure that those figures on the right, who understands that it's an improvement, that should be 100%. I'd like, or perhaps 99, perhaps you never get 100%, but I'd like to think that we could push that to 99 point something. because I passionately believe that it is an improvement. I think most people who have used it have found it as transformational. And IT professionals who feel it helps them save costs, that's an interesting one. I would like to think, and again it's a personal view, that over time that statistic will go up anyway, because we're in the early days. People are deploying solutions, some have been perhaps running 6 months, a year. I think you probably only really understand your cost savings over perhaps a slightly longer time frame. But I think 50% is great progress. I would be surprised if that didn't hit sort of 70, 80, 90% in the next 12 months as people really start to see the benefits from this disaggregation, buying services separately, moving to SaaS solutions rather than complex solutions. It's a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of deploying IT. And perhaps one thing we can help with as a supplier is starting to help organisations understand how they see those savings and what they mean in practice. Some interesting ones here. Again, you'll be glad to know we haven't pulled out all the questions, so we'll be here till 4 o'clock. We sort of picked out the ones that we feel particular interest. 71% of people don't know whether using G-Cloud will create more work for them. The devil, again, is always in the detail, but I've certainly seen in some of the engagements we've had that perhaps the thing that CloudStor does create is a degree of uncertainty. If you've been familiar to being large OJUs in the past, you know the process, you know how it works, you know you've got to do when, you know who you talk to, you know how you engage with suppliers. It's a comfortable process most people have to use. Whether you like it, as a supplier, I think we kind of, I don't know if Stephen, you're not, but we suffer OJU, and we're always pleased when we win them, of course, but it's from a SME supplier perspective, it's a frightening perspective. It can suck all our resource. For a long time. It can mean that we may have to choose to engage with one client and completely forget about others just because we have to put all our resource into managing an OJU process. But from your perspective, particularly a procurement perspective, does it create that for you of comfort? Whereas when you look at CloudStor, and I think one of the things I've heard in other things I've been to over the last 6 months, is it really that simple? And I think maybe something Peter will probably talk about is it is that simple. And certainly, as I say, the procurement we've just been through, it has worked very in a very straightforward one for that client. So in creating more work, I think it's for you as the buyers ultimately, the people buying these solutions, just to be comfortable with how it works. And find a way that works best for your organisation. Again, Peter May, I hopefully won't contradict me, but I think it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, CloudStor. You can decide how you want to use it within the guidelines that the framework has in terms of shortlisting, and you can drive it pretty quickly. I think I've heard Peter and Denise talk regularly about how they've seen procurements go through in days, and certainly the one that we've just been through happened in days as well. So it's perhaps a mental shift and just thinking, yeah, it is that easy. We need controls in place, clearly. We need to involve all the business stakeholders and make sure we're buying the right thing. But this does free up the process so we can tailor it for us. Rather than the shortlist being on a framework, so the old buying solutions list where you had sort of, 8, 10 suppliers you can choose from and go to, now you can go to 400, 500, 600. So, okay, that's daunting, but what it does mean, you've then got the ability to go to the most relevant suppliers, perhaps 4 or 5, and really get a fit for what you want. Whereas perhaps those 8 to 10 on the buying solutions framework, perhaps they're 2 years behind the times. Bearing in mind all these things are kind of 3-year types arrangements. So again, there may be more work in terms of having to shortlist, having to understand the marketplace, but the benefits for that are just far more now, if you like, now information in what you've got available and making the right choices. So it's an interesting one. I would say it's perhaps creating the right work. It's creating the right work for us as suppliers and the right work for you as organisations. So you're getting the very best solution for your requirement. 20% of procurement professionals don't understand what CloudStor is. I suspect in part that's that people haven't used it. I mean, again, I think it's like, and we've talked about it before the session kicked off, like a lot of things in life, when you move from one thing to something else and there's quite a big difference between the two, it's that first one where you kind of build your confidence. And I think what I suspect we'll find is that each individual government agency and organisation goes through its first G-Cloud procurements, they'll look at it and think, well, actually it does work. It is straightforward, it does help us, and that confidence will build. So I suspect that number, and I've been interested in other people's views during the day, is mainly due to that kind of first use type experience and just nerves about using it. But again, that may be wrong, so I'd welcome feedback when we get to the panel later on that. And to some extent also that's confident. I said in an interview a few months ago that one of the things we sometimes forget in life is how quickly things are moving. You know, CloudStore's only just celebrated its first birthday, and yet the sheer progression, I think G-Cloud 2 was 400, 500 plus suppliers, is that right, Peter? 460. You know, G-Cloud 3, I'd be surprised if it wasn't more than that. You know, we are moving phenomenally fast, and we shouldn't overlook that. We have, you know, the team, in the CloudStore team, have created a marketplace which is real, which is working. We're seeing the sales numbers through the framework jump. It's moving quickly, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. So, in terms of the confidence thing, I would, if we did the same survey in a year's time, I have little doubt that that number will be far, far higher. And the moment I think we probably all want is when people stop talking about CloudStore. You know, CloudStore should not be a topic. It's just there, it exists, and people use it by default. And that's almost, you know, Peter may disagree, but almost success for the CloudStore team is when we don't have sessions like this. It's just the way of working, and that's a real success behind it. In terms of the details, I'm not going to go into the details. I'm not sure how our people are going to, with Civil Service World, are going to release all the results and things like that, but I'm sure it will become available. But again, I mean, the results today, they are mixed in terms of people who are used to CloudStore, but again, something that's only a year old, you'd expect that. It's an immature framework, but it's moved quickly. It's maturing quickly, people are using it, the interface will change, become you know, enhanced and have functionality that people, you know, want above what it has today, and all sorts of things. So the confidence and the usability that people find with it will just improve over the coming 12 months, which I think will positively impact all these statistics. And I think, again, we have to look at this and say it's fantastic progress in sort of 18 to 24 months when we kick the whole thing off. As I said, from Francis Maud and people like Liam Maxwell pushing the message, we've come a long way. And the fact that people are now using it and procuring quite major systems through it is a real mark of success. And these are very good statistics. We asked people whether G-Cloud was an improvement to public sector procurement. 67% said yes, 23% said no. So not many said no. And possibly the ones who said no possibly haven't used it or experienced the full potential that it offers. So great progress, I think, in terms of people recognising that CloudStore can really offer value. Will it save costs and make buying easier? 50%. As I said earlier, I think that's in part just in terms of where we are. I would like to think that in 12 months, as people have seen more solutions delivered into organisations like yours and start to see the value coming out of that, that number will just rocket up to sort of 90% plus. Because I think with the competitive vision, the marketplace, the kind of the pricing landscape, it makes absolute sense to me that this has to ultimately save costs. The hidden costs, and this is where people often make the cases, oh, we need more expertise internally and that sort of thing. I think that's just controlling how you procure. You've always needed the internal expertise. Perhaps the type of expertise you need shifts. We talked about the SIAM model earlier. Perhaps the model moves from less core IT expertise and more service management expertise. I don't know, that will vary of organisations, but again, is there a transition expertise you need rather than volume of expertise? So maybe it's a shift in type rather than an increase in volume. Don't know, that's the proof's in the eating, if you like, on that, but I suspect that we will see lots of case studies coming out where that's proven over the next year. So hopefully that statistic will rise sharply, because we as a supplier certainly believe that. The vast majority don't know about G-Cloud. Again, I'll take that. As a supplier, we need to help there. The central, the Cabinet Office can do so much in educating. We as a supplier, all the suppliers in the CloudStore need to make sure that we educate and help and assist and do the right things fundamentally to make the marketplace work. So there is an emphasis on us there. We talk about barriers, and barriers, it's funny with barriers. I always think there's kind of like, there's always symptoms and then the real cause. And there's one word, so I'm wandering off again now, so I'm getting passionate about it, but I mean, probably the word there which hits the nail on the head is trust. And often things we talk about barriers are symptoms of the fact that people just don't trust something. It could be they don't trust other people or other organisations or a way of doing things that's new to them and those sort of things. And so a fundamental task that we, Peter and his team and others who are working with CloudStore, is make sure that you you as the audience for this feel you can trust it. Again, as I made the point earlier, fundamentally, I don't want you even thinking about it. Cloud storage just be something that you automatically think is a procurement route for services. And why wouldn't you use it? Why wouldn't you use suppliers who are on it? So we need to help build the trust. But again, I think that 24% is quite low in reality, depending on the speed at which we've moved. So I think that's a really positive sign. Lack of detailed information, I think that's a big thing for us as suppliers. Talking openly about it, I think when Cloud Store first appeared, and we were talking about this earlier, I think a lot of suppliers said, let's get on there, let's put some information up there, and let's see how it's go. Because just like you were probably uncertain as to whether it be, how far it was going to go, we as suppliers are thinking, well, is it going to be the route that organisations will buy through? But I think if you look at the content that's on there today, it's changed, it's changing, suppliers are putting more on there, and again, as EduServe, we need to make sure that we've got information up there, not just service details, but reference studies, case studies, and perhaps other information you might need. So again, one of the feedback that you can give us is what sort of information do you need from suppliers to help you make decisions, help you shortlist, help you make the right choices. And that would be a valuable thing that we could get out of today, but also of other engagements that we have, and that's for all suppliers. And then splitting existing services, that is complex. I mean, I've heard a number of times in sessions I've been into in the last 6 months, the sort of general comment, I've got this legacy, and it's like a glue, it's like this massive legacy I've got, and how do I want to get there, but how do I get there? And I don't think there's any easy answer to that, in fairness. It's very easy for me to make a glib statement here and say, oh, it's easy, bring EduServe in and we'll sort it out for you and all that great stuff. The reality is a lot of the emphasis is on you to look at your legacy and just go through that process, take it on, rather than look at the legacy and say, oh, we can't do anything about it. Say, we've got to change. Let's start to break it down and just work through the process. Perhaps bring in third-party organisations, perhaps learn from other organisations in government. So I think that's just a learning process. But certainly we see it. There's one customer client of ours at the moment who has exactly that issue. They have a very complex infrastructure, and it is troubles for them in actually them splitting it apart. But they are doing that. It's taking them some time, but they are doing that, and I think it will reap rewards for them in the long term. So it's a journey. The benefits, again, it'd be interesting to hear if you agree with these later on in the day. Greater competition and transparency. I'd like to think that's an absolutely type thing, but again, I'm open to people saying that's not the case. But I would like to think that is there. That should drive lower cost, but people always like to see the proof points, and I think again as suppliers and perhaps the G-Cloud team, we need to start bringing out the proof points of where the savings are and the greatest sort of return on investment. Is it faster and more effective? Again, just from what we've seen, absolutely. I'd be interested in contrary views to that, but the things that we've experienced practically, it does genuinely seem to be faster, and when managed in that way, works, we think, phenomenally. As there's one we've been through recently, which was phenomenally well managed, and I think worked very well for the end user organisation who were driving it. So with the right approach, I think it can work extremely well. And perhaps related to the first point, greater visibility of suppliers and services, I think the most fundamental thing is that you have access to what's going on now, the point I made earlier. You've got, with G-Cloud 3 coming out, you'll have a whole new range of services and suppliers available to you with things that potentially can help your business. Now, there is a challenge in that, in how do you keep abreast of it, and maybe that's just a change in how you work as individuals in terms of managing supplier base, managing markets, how IT works and that sort of thing. So, going back to my private sector days, in private sector, I suppose it's always worked like that to some extent. There's always been a marketplace, and you've always had fairly free range in terms of how you procure. But again, whether you take that choice or not, it's yours ultimately. And many private sector organisations I've dealt with have probably not done the market research they should. But then saying that, they didn't have a cloud store tool. And it's interesting that a lot of people are now talking about a cloud store tool for private sector organisations and that sort of things they can manage this. So I think that even private sector seeing the attraction of this. So I think greater visibility should hopefully bring you greater visibility of things that can work for you in practice to solve your business problems, enhance your service. We're all here ultimately to serve citizens, so provide better services out to the communities that we're addressing. Things that aren't barriers, these are great for us. I mean, again, I'm wandering off again now, because the SME angle, small suppliers, I wouldn't say it's a non-issue, but it's less of an issue than we thought it would be perhaps 18 months ago. People are looking, as I said, this procurement we've just been in, the competitive suppliers we were against were all small, very small. And this was a very big service that they were looking to procure. So there is the acceptance that small providers can bring value and do things differently. And there is a general acceptance that people think, okay, maybe taking responsibility for shortlisting rather than relying on the frameworks to do that for us is a good thing, because we have more control over that and more, let's say, more ability ultimately to buy the right things. So I think there is a general acceptance, and again, I would expect these numbers over the next 12 months to jump up, as I would probably all the statistics here. Oh, I've only got a minute left. In terms of what people are buying, I won't touch on this. It's probably, I mean, it may be obvious at the end of the day, but I think the key things, because of how CloudStor has been pushed at this stage, is infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and specialist cloud services consultancy. And if you look at the early sales through CloudStor, they were particularly in the lot 4, which is the specialist services. I suspect that's partly because they were the easy procurements to make. They were quite nimble. But if you see the ones that are coming through CloudStor now, you're seeing more in the IaaS, more in the SaaS, and more of the bigger, larger solutions. So it's maturing, it's developing. I'm sure Peter will sort of refer to that. So it's moving forward, I think, very strongly. Where are we? Point I made earlier, and we really shouldn't forget this, we've come a phenomenal way in a short period of time. And if you think forward where we could be to where we could be in 3 years, I think quite fascinating. I won't speculate now, but I think we could be in a really open and good place for government in terms of procuring and getting the best solutions and best fit for things that are needed. Significant progress in awareness. And if you go back even 12 months, most people didn't really know what CloudStor was going to be, how it's going to work, and just the stats we've had presented here today indicate there is a big acceptance that it's there, it's working. G-Cloud 3, which is in hand at the moment, no doubt will take us on a further journey, and I no doubt there'll be G-Clouds 4, 5 and into the future. So we have a framework that's adapting to your needs, listening to your needs, and just becoming more and more aligned to what you need to do to get the best out of your procurements. So there's more to be done, but we've come a long way quickly. And then, as there always should be, a little bit of sort of introspection. What do we need to suppliers? And I particularly, and I'm sure Stephen would as well, be very keen on your feedback today in terms of what you need from the likes of us. What do you need to understand? What's the information that's really important? Because we can sit around in meeting rooms in our offices in Bath and we can speculate what you need. You know, we can do that till the cows come home, but the reality is it may be stuff you don't need from us. So we would very much welcome what do you need and when to help you make the right decision about us and our services and make those comparisons. We clearly need to make sure that our service definitions are easy to understand, and that you can use those to really measure against others and benchmark. Perhaps there's other information you need. Perhaps up front you need more information about case studies, references, accreditations, those sorts of things. And perhaps you need us, perhaps there needs to be more sort of a dual relationship. Perhaps we as suppliers should get involved more. Perhaps there's more feedback, sort of opportunities and those sorts of things. Again, one of the things already we've seen with CloudStor is facilitate a lot more discussion for us directly with people in government, and perhaps we should need to do more of that. More listening, more understanding, and then helping present the information to you. So I'd certainly welcome that feedback today. So that's the survey. I think, in summary, that it was what we thought as an organisation. I think the Civil Service World did too. There's very positive results for where we come from. Welcome feedback during the day and afterwards. But at this point, I think it's hand over to Peter to talk about CloudStor from the CloudStor team perspective. And I'm hoping your slides follow on, so yes.
I think, firstly, Andrew, you've said all I wanted to say, so thanks a lot. And I think it's really heartening to see suppliers standing up and telling the message of G-Cloud and spreading the word and really helping buyers. I mean, it's really heartening for us as a team. We are a small team, so we'd really like to do more of these events if we could. We do try and get out and about as much as we can, but to see, so really a big thanks to EduServe and to Civil Service World for putting something like this on and helping spread the word. So really great to see that. We'd like to do more. So I'm Peter Middleton. I'm in the G-Cloud team. I think we've got Dave Denton here from the team. So Dave's going to come up on the panel at the end. We got Ren as well. I think Ren was due to come. Ren is our commercial lead. Unfortunately, he's got a bad cold, so he's had to stay indoors. And with the daylight today, it's not great to be coming out. So where to start? I mean, I think you've said all I wanted to say, Andrew. You've spread all the words. So I think what we're going to just talk about is a little bit about where we are, where we're going, and try and reinforce some of the benefits of G-Cloud and look about what's coming next. And like Andrew said, hopefully bring out some of things that are on your mind. Because absolutely we want this to work for you. We want G-Cloud to work. We want this marketplace to work. And I think from what I've heard this morning already, there's real clear evidence that the marketplace is working. It is working for SMEs like EduServe. We know from the buyers that we talk to that it's working for them. We want to make it much easier for you to buy services. We want to make it much easier for suppliers to come on and provide services, tap into that innovation. So we really do, we really do want to make this about making government IT simpler, quicker and better. So the G-Cloud, I think, as Andrew said, it's been around for some time. I won't go into the background, just to say that we celebrated our first anniversary for the framework in February. And the G-Cloud vision really is about trying to find a better way of doing things. This was where it was born. We wanted to find a better way. The status quo wasn't good enough. We've outsourced too much. It's too difficult. It's too slow, too expensive. And G-Cloud was saying, well, we've got to find better ways of doing this. How can we do it? Let's experiment. Let's see if it works. Let's try and make the public cloud first work as a policy. And, we see this as a key tool to help. It's not going to be the solution to everything. Not everything will go in the public cloud, but we think having a public cloud first policy is important. And there is a paper on the desk of Francis Maud. There is a cabinet committee that will be reviewing that in the not too distant future, and we do hope that will become something, a reality. A quote there from Denise McDonough, who's our program director. She really sees this as an essential tool. It would probably only apply to central government, not to the wider public sector, but it's still part of our toolkit. The vision is all about trying to shift away from those big is beautiful projects into from the customization, the huge sort of long procurements, into this commodity solution. It's about trying to find the best fit, not the perfect fit. It's about trying to understand what you can buy, what meets your service need. So it's trying to look at what just paying for what you use. This whole idea of pay as you go, making it easy for you to come in and out of contracts, not being locked into these long-term 7-year, 10-year deals. And scaling up and scaling down and really changing the way we use IT, but not just the use of it, but thinking about how we approach IT. And Andrew has quite eloquently sort of covered a lot of those points. And ultimately, as he said, it's about trying to help you, arm you with the right tools, the marketplace, to deliver better value services, more responsive services to the world that's changing at a rapid pace. We don't want, government has to keep up. It's not keeping up. The IT base in government is way behind. Some departments are on browsers that were almost last century when they came out. So we do need to be much more agile, more mobile, and G-Cloud, we think, is a real game changer in that space. So where are we today? Well, we've just celebrated our first birthday of the framework, not the program itself. So we do have the marketplace there. It is there. It is working. It can get better, and we will get better. The sales are ramping up. Okay, we've got a long way to go, but I'll come on to some of the numbers in a second. We've got 460 suppliers, and as Andrew mentioned earlier, 75% of those are SMEs. That's an incredible number to think that most of those probably couldn't even compete in a non-G-Cloud marketplace. And what we've heard of SMEs like EduServe and many of the others is that they're really passionate about what they do, and they're really flexible, a lot more flexible in the way they provide their services. And the service that they provide is really key for that sort of organisation. So we're really doing all we can to lower the bar as low as possible to get as many suppliers on as we can. And we think that the breadth of that marketplace, the increase in choice, is of great benefit because of the transparency, because it's driving competition down. So we are making it a lot easier for buyers. There's no mistake about that. People do say, this is great, we can buy things in a week, 2 weeks, instead of running our own procurement. We've done 3 procurements, overdue procurements, in practically the last 12 months, which has been a lot of work for us, but it means that you don't have to do the work yourself. So we're trying to take away some of that headache from you. And similarly for the suppliers, we're making it a much more level playing field for SMEs. And there are a couple of targets here that we play into. So there is a wider piece on trying to deliver 50% of new IT spend in central government through the cloud by 2015, and that's not too far away, that's a couple of years away. And the second target is to have 25% of business by value going through SMEs, again that's by 2015. So I think G-Cloud really is going to help on that second score, is helping. The numbers actually speak to that quite clearly. And obviously we are getting the message out. The numbers do see, the survey does seem to suggest that you do know what we're talking about. But, like I say, we do need to do more. So in terms of sales, we've got 7.4 million to the end of January. Okay, that doesn't look great, but we know that probably is the data is probably under by at least 100%. We don't know, because the data flow is very slow, because it depends on the supplier. So any suppliers that are in here, please do send your returns into Government Procurement Service, because unless you don't, we don't know what's been bought and what's been ordered. But there's a few other numbers here. The volume of work going through to SMEs by volume through central government, this is about 80%, which is huge. You know, it's a real staggering figure. And in terms of sales, 70% of the sales are going to SMEs. So, okay, you may not trust, you may have some concerns or question marks about new suppliers, but the evidence suggests the buyers are actually using the SMEs much more than some of the bigger companies, because of course there's a whole breadth of scale on G-Cloud, the store. So I think, you know, we have come a long way in a very quick time. There is more we can do to get the message out, but G3 is here. That closed last week. I can't tell you the numbers yet because we haven't done the math on that, but we are expecting, I think the words were, we've got a bumper crop of suppliers come in, and we will hopefully, as soon as we can, tell people the numbers on the doors for that. And similarly with the sales, I think we're going to publish probably in the next week or so the sales figures up to February, and we do expect that to jump up. I think we did tweet last week, so I can tell you guys that we did have about 2.2 million in January, so that's just 1 month after Christmas, 2.2 million in sales. So expect those numbers to go up exponentially. Okay, so let's look at the benefits in a bit more detail. And I think Andrew's covered a lot of these, but we did want to make it as easy as possible for you to buy. So we've done the procurement so you don't have to do that. So you don't need to run an overdue procurement, never mind whether it's above the threshold or not. You don't have to do any mini competitions. Okay, there's an element of in some of the services, particularly around Lot 4 in the specialist cloud support services, where you may have to do proposals, but it's not a competition as such. And we give you the compliant self-service cloud store, which by using it and following the selection process, you know complies to procurement law, and that you're going to be able to do that without any hassle. So it's lowering the bar, it's making it easier, much more quick and more agile. The transparency piece is very important. having all the prices on there so that you can see what the marketplace offers, so that suppliers can see what their competitors offer, that is very important. And obviously, from what Andrew says, it's having an effect. People are looking at that. They are seeing what their competitors are offering and how they're offering it, and using that information to then improve their own services. And that's a really important part of making the marketplace work and driving the competition and then driving the prices. We do believe that significant savings can be made. We don't have good data on that. We don't have big benefits cases and reports that the National Audit Office will put their stamp of approval on, because we don't have the resources. You know, we've got a third of the team practically in the room with Dave and myself today, so it's not great. What we would say is, if your suppliers like EduServe and together, if you've got data that you could share with us, then we'd love to hear that. Love to hear your stories. But from the cases we do know, we believe that savings are of an order of magnitude of between about 50 to 90%. And that's huge. There are cases where in their existing sort of world with an incumbent, it was going to be 4 million, and through the cloud it's going to be about 70,000. So there's a huge reduction in cost. And we need to just build on that. And it's all about being more agile and responsive. Your organisations have been forced to respond to a new world out there. We all have a much more agile and responsive personal life, and we need to build on that. We need to be much more rapid in the way we change, and we also need to lower the cost of failure and the price of success. We can't afford to throw away hundreds of millions of pounds on projects that don't work. We need to be able to experiment and iterate, and I think Cloud Store gives us the tools to do that. We tell buyers all the time, if you're not sure, try it. Take out three licenses for 3 months, and if it doesn't work out, you stop your contract. But if it does, then you can upscale. You know, that's the beauty of it. Okay, so there are a few principles around buying, and these are important to keep front of mind when you are looking at the Cloud Store. So the Cloud Store is the online catalogue. So this is where all the services that have been procured, the responses to our own procurement, our own ODU, will be available to look at as an online catalogue. So it's a catalogue model. It's not a transactional store. You can't click on the little shopping trolley and then buy it later. We are in the middle of doing developing a new Cloud Store. I'll come on to that in a little while. But it still won't be transactional. So what can you buy? You can only buy cloud-based services. So that seems obvious, but actually quite a lot of people come and say, well, can we buy PCs through it? And we say, no, you can't. You can only buy services. You can't buy software. You can't buy licenses. So you can only buy commodity-based services, subscription services, or cloud supporting services. So these are the Lot 4 services around helping you to transition your organisation. So I think Andrew mentioned early on, we saw a lot of cloud services under Lot 4 because people needed the help to understand where are we going with this, and there are lots of services on there. The services are fixed at the point of tender. So what does this mean? This means that you can't negotiate. You can't say, give me a special deal. You can't ask for volume discounts. But let me just correct that. You can ask for volume discounts, but if the supplier does say yes, then they have to offer that to everybody. They have to treat government as one customer. And that's an important part of the mechanism. Whatever you get, even if you're a very small organisation or a very big one, those prices have to be offered as one customer. But what that takes away from you is, because the terms are non-negotiable, because you're not going into this as a negotiation, you're buying a commodity, it's going to save you a whole lot of hassle and time, not having to go through all the lawyers and the review, that takes months, the legal team, everything else. So you are buying fixed services that are non-negotiable. And last point on this slide, no prime contracting. So you can't go to the store and say, oh, I want you to then go away and buy loads of other services and act as a prime. You've got to have that relationship with each of those vendors directly. Again, this is about taking control, part of that agenda to break up that model, to disaggregate. There is a whole lot more around this in terms of the buying process. I don't think we've got time for that today, but normally what Dave and I do in terms of events is to help smaller groups of buyers through the buying process. So if anybody of you does want that sort of session, then come and talk to either Dave or me and we can set something up and we'll talk through that. We also have 53 pan-government accredited services, which is a great milestone for us. It's been quite a difficult journey to get so many services on there, but we've passed the 50 mark, so it's a bit of a landmark. And these are services that have got the pan-government accreditation badge, IL2, IL3. So these are services that our security people have accredited, and they've identified what the residual risks are, and this information will be then available to you as a buyer, and you can buy that knowing what the risks are from the outset and that they are accredited up to IL3. I don't think we've got any IL4 yet, but I think there are some suppliers that are intending to get that far. And these tend to jump up in sort of like step changes. Every month, hopefully we'll get another few in, so we've got 53 now. We know there is a lot more in the pipeline, and we know that this has been a bit of a bottleneck, but do bear with us on that. Okay, G-Cloud frameworks. I think it's important to stress that G-Cloud isn't just one framework, it's this idea of rolling frameworks. So, as I said just earlier, we've done 3 procurements. We've just closed our last one in pretty much a year, really, well, from the end of 2011. And all those frameworks, there's only one currently live. The first one is sort of a bit of a pilot, so that was shorter. The ones going forward will be all 12 months, and they'll tend to overlap by about 6 months. So there will always be perhaps 3 almost live at the same time once we get going with G4. G3 will be starting next month, hopefully by mid-April, which we do expect a bumper crop. They will all have the same structure, so there's the 4 lots: infrastructure, platform, software, and specialist cloud services. G2 has a framework value of up to 100, G3 up to 200. We'd love to see people coming in with contracts that will take us above that limit, so get your skates on. And call off contracts of up to 24 months. So those are the frameworks. G4, given the sort of time frame that we've got, probably likely to kick that off in June, but exact timings haven't been agreed yet. Another important piece is around the contractual precedents, and as I mentioned earlier, the terms that we use are made up of several parts, and all of these are non-negotiable. So read them, but you can't change any of it. You've got to just accept them, and it's a take it or leave it approach. And interestingly, you're going to be signing up to the supplier's terms, depending on the service that you use. And what we say is, those terms are there, you can read them from the first minute that you've got an idea that you might want to use a service. Go and read the terms. Go and look at the service definition. That information is on the store. So this idea of having to sort of negotiate terms and then getting blocked at the end of a procurement because you can't come to a deal on the terms and all this and the other, forget all that. You can do that from day one and understand whether the service fits from a technical perspective and a commercial perspective. And you really need to have those two at front of mind from the outset. But there is an order of precedence. So at the top, between the supplier and the government procurement service, is the framework agreement. That's the sort of big chunky agreement that covers all the good stuff like data protection. Then underneath that, call-off agreement, Schedule 2, order form, and then the supplier, terms between the supplier and the buyer. And this order of precedence is important because nothing in the supplier's terms can contradict anything higher up in order of precedence. So you can't. And so part of what we're trying to do with suppliers is encourage them to say, well, look, you make it as easier as possible for buyers by making the terms as aligned to that buying process as possible. Make sure that you don't have things in there that contradict other aspects or clauses in the main agreements, because it's just a waste of time having it in there and it's confusing for the buyer. So really make sure that you try and build that in from the start. But we do need to achieve more, and okay, we've got to get the message out more. We've got to deal with some of the technical and complexity issues. So we're raising awareness. Obviously, some of what we're doing is working because the message is getting out there. But we do need to do more. We need to do more organisationally. We want to work with you guys, the buyers, to really raise the bar as an organisation, not just sort of pockets of activity within your organisation. So we want to see departments running their own G-Cloud awareness sessions, and we'll be happy to come along and help you to do that. We want to see champions of the cloud within departments. And we'd really like to come in and do more work with you and handhold, and we are trying to do that. But if we had more of us, we'd do a lot more of that, wouldn't we, Dave? So do tell us what you're trying to achieve. The more events like this, the better. We are delivering a new cloud store, so a lot of the feedback we've got from buyers and suppliers is that the cloud store was just a really poor experience and very difficult to search. It's putting people off. It's quite not at all intuitive. So we've listened to that. We're developing a new website with new guidance, new resources. We've got a new cloud store which will all be much whizzier and look better and be all based on usability. We've had lots of sessions with buyers and suppliers as we've gone through the design process. So it's all been done in the new sort of agile fashion. And hopefully that's going to come soon. I can't give you a date when, but soon. We do need to challenge internal processes. A lot of the discussions that we have and the way we're asked to intervene is to say, well, look, we've come to an award, but we've got the legal team want to review all the terms and conditions. We spent 2 months blocked in discussions, and these are it's all part of changing that mindset. We do need to change that, and we need to challenge it, and we need to be agents of change and say, look, for smaller pieces of work, for the cloud, when we're doing smaller chunks of work, we need to have the right sort of processes to ensure that the agility works across the whole piece. We need to address the security concerns, build confidence in public cloud, and I think the PGA piece is a very important part of that, but also we need to have real life examples, make it real, so the stories that the suppliers bring along to that. And we need to make that much more available, and we need to be able to use our resources to connect people. So we do a lot of the connecting, building bridges between one department or one organisation and another, saying, well, we've got very similar requirements. I had a discussion last week, somebody said, well, tell me about somebody who's doing Office 365 because we really need some help. So we sort of broker those discussions, and people find that really useful. We hope that we can make the public cloud first policy central and work. There is a piece around standards. I think there are varying views on that. It'd be interesting to see whether you find that's an important enabler or a barrier. And I think, as Andrew said, it's about changing not the way not our appetite for risk, but changing the way that we approach risk management, perhaps. Understanding the different types of risks that come with cloud and the way that you manage cloud. Embracing more direct control, we think that's good. Taking a pragmatic approach, and if things seem too big, then our advice is to start somewhere. It doesn't matter where, you need to start somewhere, experiment, transition in small steps. Go at a pace that's comfortable to you, but you've got to start. Don't use an excuse for not starting. So there's a lot to do. I think so how does that translate into our immediate focus? Well, we've got to make the new cloud store work for you, for buyers, for the suppliers. That's imperative to us. That's the keystone of our marketplace. So we've got to make that better. We've got to make the guidance better, clearer, so that we take away some of those question marks around, well, is it going to be more work for me? What are the benefits? We need to remove those question marks. We want to make it as clear as possible what the benefits are and what the processes you need to follow. But we also want to make it more real. What is it you should be using cloud for? And the best way to do that is to share experiences, see what other people are doing. So a lot to do, and our contacts are here. I think we're going to do questions at the end, but I did have a question for you. So we want to know what we need to do to get you on board on this journey. So do tell us what we need to do more of or less of. So hopefully we can pick that up in the panel at the end. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Well, we've heard from somebody right at the centre of G-Cloud and from a supplier's point of view. But I think it'd be good also, particularly given the quantity of procurement professionals we've got in the room, to have somebody coming from a legal angle.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I should then introduce you.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's Barry Jennings from Burdenberg.
Good morning, everyone. What I'm going to try and do today is actually, this is broadly a presentation I give to private sector clients as well, because I think, as Andrew and Peter have sort of said, is actually part of the transition to cloud computing, is trying to recognise where as the public sector you aren't special and you don't need something that's bespoke for you, and where you do. And there are areas where the public sector is different and has some different needs. But I think it's useful to sort of approach it from a perspective of saying, well, actually, as far as possible, we want to move towards this standardised, commoditised approach. So stop seeing ourselves as unique, and actually, as far as possible, where can we just accept what's out there in the marketplace already? What I'm going to try and do, I think it's fair to say, this presentation comes from a 3-hour strategy workshop that we run for clients. It got reduced down to an hour, it got reduced down to 20 minutes, and now I'm aware that I'm standing between you and coffee, so I'm going to do this in 10 minutes. But the first one is sort of striking the right balance, and I've got it there as negotiating cloud contracts. And I think what's important here is to say that actually negotiating really is the wrong word. As far as possible, you should be avoiding trying to negotiate cloud contracts, not just because G-Cloud is set up with terms and conditions that are there for you to use, but actually, even if it wasn't to do with public procurement and frameworks, the act of negotiating in cloud services arrangements is A, often fruitless, because suppliers just simply won't move from their standard positions, and B, it only drives up costs. If you're requiring suppliers every time they make a sale to send in negotiation teams, then that drives up their internal costs, that drives up the price they can offer for their cloud services. So it should be something that should be approached with caution in all circumstances. I'll very briefly touch on data protection because it is slightly separate from the IL accreditation approach, and there are still things that you need to do as a data controller if you're trying to put personal data in the cloud. I'll skip very quickly over the IP issues today, and then finally I'll mention how to stay flexible and avoid lock-in issues. In terms of the key legal and commercial issues, I think the main thing to take away is that actually it's about risk analysis, and it's not about doing that sequentially, so finding solutions you like, then trying to negotiate a commercial deal, then getting your lawyers to look at the terms and conditions. The whole thing needs to be looked at in the round. So there's no point having your lawyers sat in the end and giving them a set of terms and conditions that they can't accept for your organisation, but you found a solution you really like. Get the lawyers involved early, because there will be a sign-off process. You're not going to be able to avoid that, but get them to the point where they can understand why that set of terms and conditions is appropriate for the solution that you're buying in. I think that it's true to say that the biggest barrier is actually not just in the legacy services that already exist, but the legacy contracting arrangements, the outsourcing arrangements that exist within the public sector. G-Cloud already provides an excellent tool if you're doing something brand new. If you're trying to launch a new service, I would say go to G-Cloud by default, because if it's there, it's much easier to go and buy it sort of off the shelf than it is to submit change requests to your outsourcing service provider. Much easier to just go and see if it's there already. Where it becomes a lot more difficult is if you're effectively saying, well, I want to stop paying my current supplier for doing this because they're doing it bespoke for me and I want to go and buy it here. The buying, it's actually quite easy. The stopping paying for it, when you're already paying for it, that's the bit that's really difficult, because the big supply contracts you have don't set out those services in that way. They don't sort of say, oh, here's Lego brick 1, which you can just take out and therefore I'll take this amount off of your cost base. It's actually, the contract is put together in a really cohesive way, and that suits suppliers because it's really difficult to pull things out. And obviously they're reluctant to do anything that reduces their revenue under the contract because they've probably booked that in their accounts already. So it gives them stock exchange issues, it gives them revenue recognition issues. So it's a real problem for suppliers. It's not just that they're unwilling to do it, but they really find it difficult to do without causing them some big corporate financing, accounting issues. The other really big issue is around TUPE transfers and staff. So if you're doing something already with an outsourcing service provider and you move to a cloud supplier who's doing it on a multi-tenancy basis, then you don't have a continuing activity, so TUPE's not triggered. So you end up with redundant staff and you end up with a redundancy cost. Your contract will set out who pays for that. Now that may be the supplier, it may be the customer, but there's going to be rules and indemnities around that. So that's again a really big barrier. What I would say is none of that's insurmountable. It's just about addressing it early. And the benefits that come from cloud computing and tower services and all of those sorts of models, they probably won't come in the first few years because actually your internal transition costs are going to be high. And you're going to be doing a lot of upskilling. You're going to be looking at your retained organisation and how you build up the skills that you have. But what that gives you is transparency and control over your whole supply chain, which ultimately the competition that brings should allow you to generate really good savings in the long term. I mean, that's the theory. In terms of the approach to contract, I think the key thing to say is actually cloud contracts, they're an arbitrage of risk, cost and control. It's about the customer taking on more risk. It's about the customer giving up control. And in return for that, the customer gets very good cost savings. You end up potentially paying 10% of what you were going to pay previously. So not taking 10% savings out, actually reducing your cost to 10% of what they were before. But that obviously comes with a price in terms of the risk that you're taking on. What I'd reiterate there is actually to see contract review as part of the early procurement process. It's not the end gating governance process. Look at it at the outset. I think the slides can be circulated. I'm happy for them to be, so I won't go through this in detail. All this is some pointers to the things to look out for in cloud services agreements. We've broken them down into thinking about the implementation costs, the service costs, and the exit transition costs, so you can try and get a whole life picture. But it's fair to say that there's not a one-size-fits-all, this is what a cloud agreement looks like, this is the commercial offering that's there. Suppliers take very varied approaches to what they charge for, what they don't charge for, what they price in, what they don't price in, and therefore where your costs can vary over time as you use and develop the service. So data protection and personal data in cloud computing. It's fair to say this remains, for the private sector, public sector, the key barrier to the adoption of cloud computing and the most concerning aspect. And that's because the regulatory regime is from a different time. It wasn't built for the internet, let alone cloud computing. and also it's jurisdictional on basis, and that causes problems with an information regime that's actually about removing sort of artificial man-made barriers of where we decided the borders between countries were, and more about where data can flow and how it's protected at the perimeter of any system. Again, it's risk-based assessment. It's about asking the right questions to your supplier of what it is they're providing, what their service features are, and how they go about securing data within their service, and understanding whether that's appropriate for the data set you're trying to put on there. That's the key question you're trying to get to. The Information Commissioner's Office have produced some really good guidance on cloud computing on this. I'd recommend starting there if you're looking at cloud services, because it gives you a whole list of questions that A, you should ask, because if there's ever an issue, the ICO will ask you if you've asked them, and B, it's a really good starting point to get a dialogue going with your supplier and understanding what it is they're doing to secure the data, because I can guarantee there aren't cloud providers out there who are going, well, actually, we don't care about security. What they're concerned about is designing bespoke security solutions or bespoke security clauses for individual customers. So it's more about understanding what their product offers and then getting yourself comfortable with the risk that that entails. I won't go into these slides in any great detail, but it's just to say, if you're looking at data protection, and this isn't specific to cloud computing really, but you'll look at the technical concerns. So how technically is security managed? Where is my data held? That's obviously a key requirement under the Data Protection Act. For the public sector, it's relatively easy because most of the time there will be security issues that mean that it will be held in the UK only. If not, it will be in the EEA. Won't really have public sector data going beyond that. I did want to mention the sort of flexibility and mobility things that cloud is supposed to enable. I mean, if you move away from the cost-saving benefits of cloud, the key benefit is around flexibility and people being able to work on their own devices or being able to work from home locations, all sorts of good flexible working targets that are part of most corporate IT strategies. This starts to bring in big issues about who's using devices once they're out there, and how do you authenticate the person who's doing it? If you've given someone access on their iPad, are they giving that to their kid or their wife to use? How is that being secured? So there's some concerns around security there, but again, it's about understanding what the services offer and what you require for the way you're going to use it. And then a final flag that actually it's rarely the technology that goes wrong in the data security breaches. It's normally someone has left a laptop on the train, somebody has taken something into the work environment that they shouldn't have done, and that's what's caused the issue. So most of cloud deployment, the security issues, are around people management, cultural change, and so forth. Lock-in issues, are minimum terms acceptable? I think Peter said the G-Cloud frameworks allows a 24-month call-off. I was involved in some initial discussions around G-Cloud where there was talk of saying, well, actually, we shouldn't move away from the Amazon model, which is you have no committed term and you can move in and out of it as you want. I think what's taken over that is the sort of commercial reality of suppliers sort of saying, well, ultimately, if you commit some revenue, we can give you a better price. And so you get a commercial reality coming in there to say that minimum terms are acceptable, but the term of contract never goes beyond 2 years for cloud agreements. I've not seen it beyond that. So we're not talking the 5 or 10 year agreements that used to be more typical. The key lock-in issues are around data extract, and how you get your data back from somebody else's cloud. That's both a technical challenge, so how do you do it technically, but also if you're going to need your suppliers' help doing that, how much are they going to charge you for that? And Peter also mentioned the development of standards in that area as well, so that's worth keeping an eye on. So what I'll conclude with very quickly to allow us to go for coffee, the three statements that, having worked in cloud services for a while now, I think reflect my conclusions that I've made, and hopefully they'll be of use to you when thinking about cloud computing. Cloud contracts reflect the fact that the cloud services are multi-tenancy. You're not building bespoke solutions just for you anymore. So the supplier's attitude to risk will be based on the fact that they are providing that same infrastructure to lots of people. As a result of that, the customer has to accept more risk and less control. I mean, just take one example would be change control. Most public sector departments are used to having change control procedures which say, we can request a change whenever we like and you can't refuse to accept that change. If you're looking at a multi-tenancy shared infrastructure, you can see why suppliers wouldn't accept that position that one customer could mandate a change for the rest of their customer base. So change control is fundamentally different in a cloud environment than it would have been in the traditional outsourced environment. The benefits of cloud computing come from the way that the services are used. Actually, the services are built. What the customer needs to do to really get the benefit from cloud computing is do a proper risk appraisal and find a solution that matches its risk appetite in terms of the service, the commercial model, the legal provisions. And also, if you're moving to a genuine pay-as-you-go model, how are you going to control that demand? And I flag this here today particularly because this is an area where the public sector has done appallingly badly in the past. I've seen situations where departments have unknowingly been paying for floors of computers where they've got no staff there anymore and they're just sat on desks and they're paying a per desktop price. That sort of thing is crazy. In the cloud, you have even less visibility of that because you don't have physical devices that you can go and see. So how do you know if staff are leaving, you're closing down their password and their account and not continuing to pay for something like that? So demand management is absolutely key to getting the cost savings that you'll be looking for in your business case. And then my final point is to say that I think it brings together a lot of what's been talked about this morning, that cloud services are more like products than sort of the bespoke responding to requirements that the IT suppliers have traditionally done. Actually, a lot of work, the suppliers put a lot of work in trying to develop and position solutions for certain market needs. I mean, EduServe are a good example of that. They're not trying to sell services to absolutely everyone. They're trying to sell services to particular types of people who have particular types of needs. So I say that the cloud services are particularly like cars. You can buy a Mercedes, you can buy a Ford. You might be able to add certain alloys, configure around the edges, get some of your preferences in there. But actually, if you went to Ford and said, here's my design for a car, can you build me that for me? That would be very expensive. Or if you did it on the cheap, it would be very dangerous. And I think that's absolutely true for cloud services as well. So I think that's a really good way for customers to start looking at it. Say, don't look at it as IT services. Try to think about how you would buy a product in your own life. You're unlikely to go into a supermarket and say, actually, this is exactly what I need. There's a set of products on the shelves, and you're buying from those shelves. And that's exactly what the G-Cloud store is. It's a supermarket for cloud services. You're buying the products that are there, not necessarily the dream product that you're looking to produce for yourself. So thank you. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to stay around later for questions. I am going to stay for coffee, so if anyone does have any questions, then come and find me during the coffee break, or I'm pretty easy to find on the Bird & Bird website, so I'd be happy to take questions by email or so forth after the event. Thank you very much.
Hi, yes, I'm Andrea Marston and I'm the Programme Manager for the DEFRA Network Open Working Programme, which is a programme which has been running since last September in DEFRA. And I'm here to tell you that my programme could not exist and could not deliver if we didn't have the G-Cloud. The G-Cloud has been an absolute godsend for us and I am a huge supporter. What I'd like to do is really just talk through a little bit about the DEFRA Now programme, just to set the context for you, and also about our delivery approach, because that will give you an understanding of why the G-Cloud has been important to us. And then I'm going to hand over to David, and David's going to go through all the juicy details of how we went about procuring our services. So the DEFRA Network Open Working Programme is principally a programme about information management and sharing. It's really about our network being, at the moment, a little bit disconnected, suffering from a number of legacy systems, some of which are working reasonably well, others aren't. But also we have a potential to start becoming better connected and better joined up across the whole of our business areas by exploiting new technology. And that is where the cloud services have been really useful to us, because it's helped us to explore some of those possibilities. The approach we've actually taken was based on the fact that we have quite a large network of business users with a lot of different business interests. So actually delivering a program to find a solution to cover information management and sharing, one solution, one size fits all, was impossible. It was also, with our existing services, going to be extremely expensive and hugely time consuming, which is why we decided to take a different approach to delivery. And our delivery approach is based on something called the incremental approach, which is designed under agile principles. And it's principally there to actually help us unpick business problems and deliver solutions which are tailored to the business need. So the idea is that what we do is we find a problem and we work with the business, small groups of enthusiastic people and suppliers that we've actually taken down from the cloud store to deliver solutions. And we produce the basic solutions quite quickly, which again the cloud store has enabled us to do. And using those solutions, we decide whether or not we want to grow those out in the business or take a different approach. And because we're not locked into a supplier and we're not locked into a solution, we've been able to change quickly and move quickly. And some of our solutions have been actually put out within 6 weeks, which frankly, a year ago, we could never have conceived of that being possible. Okay, I'm going to hand over to David now.
So my job is to buy the services to help the programme do what the programme's trying to do. So those are the services we've bought. All but the first one have been bought from the G-Cloud, and that's only because the G-Cloud wasn't in existence, or the cloud store wasn't in existence when we were at the package assessment stage. I'll reflect on one of the later slides about how that might have been. We could have easily have bought it from the G-Cloud, but how differently that could have happened. Going forwards, there's a couple of additional services we're looking at buying. An innovation service. So this is about being able to, if somebody has an idea of doing something with a wiki or a blog or something, to spin up a solution on a sort of free-to-use hosting platform using open source software without having to first of all kind of say, well, this is what we want to do and work out what the brief is and then going to the cloud. So it's just an even faster way of buying services. Once we've established the concept, then we would look at buying the service from the cloud. And then the other thing is platform as a service. While what we got there is our software as a service solutions, we are looking at how we could buy a platform, get open source software, maybe get some development resource and get a sort of mixture of a solution, put it together ourselves. That would be cheaper, but there's a service integration impact of doing so. We're a quite traditional department in that we have a service integrator in IBM, and our so just using G-Cloud is different for us. To go even further down the route of integrating services is quite a step for the department to take. This is a procurement approach we take, broadly based on G-Cloud principles that are on the Cloud Store website. The aim that we follow through going through this is to put the search out, see what hits you get, and then work through those to get to a manageable number. You get quite a big response sometimes, and we sort of work down to use our resources effectively, looking in more detail at a smaller number of suppliers rather than trying to do an evaluation on a large number. I've missed 2 stages off this because this is the procurement approach we follow for this pilot. And they are, if we were bringing this in a service onto live service, we would be looking at service integration and security. And as I said about how we're geared up as a department with an SI and quite a small service management function, we need to look at the services we're taking on board and how we're going to manage those. And also, the point about buying from the cloud is you're buying what people are offering. It's quite immature at the moment what people are offering, so the service levels are quite often different. And if you're trying to bring that on board a structure that's used to working to quite set service levels, you just need to understand what the implications are of working with different service levels. And security was the other thing. It's not an issue at the moment because we're trialling solutions, and so the security constraint isn't an issue in the pilot stage. If we went into live, whether it was IL2 or IL3 would be relevant, and so we're buying services that can be accredited to that level. The fact they're not accredited at this stage isn't a huge issue. There's a few points to note. So these are some of the experiences we've had. So search criteria, I have had hits that go on for about sort of 10, 15 pages. You go, I'm not sure I really want to evaluate 130 suppliers. Some of that's down to that the search engine gives quite a broad response. So if you put in change management suppliers, you can get software as a service solutions that link to change management as much as suppliers who are offering those services. And you just need to work your way through the list and do the first cut of sort of, no, they're definitely not in, and you're quite quickly down into a more usable number. You can put different criteria in to see if that helps the search. You just need to be consistent in the way you're doing your searching. Error 404 messages, these are, we don't get so many of these. It happened on the early cloud store. You go to click on a link and it says the document's not there. Whether that's, so my view is that the supplier can see just as easy as me what their page is reporting. So you could take the view that if it's not there, you can't evaluate it. That's fine if you've got enough responses, but at the end of the day, you're trying to buy a service, so long as you're consistent in going back, if you go back to one supplier, you go back to another supplier to say, I can't access your pricing, for instance. General procurement principles apply. I think you need to be fair and transparent to all, so that links with the point I've just made. The audit trail, I think, is important. So I'm going to come on to the next slide about some of the internal barriers. And they're not really barriers, to be honest, but so long as you can say, well, this is how I've gone about evaluating and deciding who I'm appointing, and you have an audit trail that says this is what I've done, that's fine. You know, that's all that's involved. I use a matrix that says, well, I've looked at these elements, and this is what the supplier can do, and I've deselected this supplier because they don't meet this requirement I got. And that works as a working document I can use to drive the evaluation. Put up here terms and conditions, that's been mentioned before. So I think it's important. I had an issue with IPR with one supplier who we had a question whether who owned the IPO and the work they provided under Lot 4. And their terms and conditions were quiet on the matter. The overlay terms don't cover them. What I've now done going forward is to have a special term that says that covers IPR. It's just a case of you're not just looking at the price or the service subscription, you're looking at the terms and conditions as well. And finally, pricing, the point has been made about volume. Don't just take the price on the cloud store as the price. You need to look at the links that they've included to understand what the price they're offering. And if you've got, as we have, we're talking about a pilot with 50 users, but possibly ramping up to 20,000. I'm wanting to know, well, when we get to that stage, what happens to the pricing then? And then concluding, so DEFRA's experience with cloud, good or bad, Andrea's referred to how the program's found it. I think we're pretty happy too in the procurement department. I've been asked to say something about internal barriers. And I think the issue is that people are used to the traditional approach where you get tenders in and you evaluate them and you're following a process. The difference with we've been using the identify a fully capable supplier and select the lowest price supplier of those. As long as you explain that to people and that's the process you're following, they're fine with it. The other issue is when you go to procurement to place the order, they'll have a procedure that says talks about getting 3 quotes in and etc. So long as you say, well, I've gone to the cloud, I've looked at these offers, I've evaluated them, and this is the supplier I've chosen, procurement are fine with that. So you demonstrate how you've gone through it. The teething issues with the cloud store, you just work with it and work around it. Sometimes in the early days we came to the team in G Cloud to get some assistance. Timescales are certainly reduced because you're engaging with the suppliers from the start, and you can start reviewing their service descriptions. You haven't got the tender response period where you put the requirement out and don't know whether someone's going to come back or not. In the example from the package assessment at the beginning, we went out to a 12 supplier framework and got 2 responses back. If I'd gone through the G Cloud, I could have been talking to the suppliers and and evaluating what they could do for us, getting the best fit, and I think we would have got a better number of suppliers. We're not saying that the work itself was not up to the standard. The effort required is different. You're not putting it together an ITT and a service description, but you've got a brief that you're working to. You're evaluating what's there. You're just doing things. I think it's less effort from a procurement point of view, but you're doing things in a different order. The cost transparency is very useful. I've had examples where Microsoft is an interesting example. They're very aggressively pricing SharePoint, and so you can have discussions with other suppliers who are offering competitive products and saying, well, this is what they're doing. How are you proposing to respond? And EduServe have said the same. They look at the market. I think it's a beneficial thing. And then the final point I want to make is that that Andrea said about how we could have done this differently if we hadn't had the cloud store. With our SI, we would have definitely taken longer to get to contract. We would definitely have higher day rates. The likelihood of them spinning up a trial version of something is quite remote. What we've done with using G Cloud to support DEFRA now, we've been able to say, well, here's a solution. We're going to use it for 3 months, and if we don't like it, we don't need to use it anymore. So hugely beneficial from our point of view. And that's that.
Okay, we're going to move on to a panel discussion. So if I could ask Peter, Andrew, Andrea, David and Dave as well to come and join me. Okay, I want to open straight to the floor, so we've got as much time as possible for your questions. We've got mics at the back, so I'm hoping I won't have to ask one of my questions, and that some of you will raise your hands now. I think, Stephen, you said at the beginning, we want to address some of the elephants that might be in the room, and we want to front up to barriers or problems that you guys perceive. So don't be afraid to raise your concerns. We really want to be able to address them. So, any questions? Okay, we have one here at the front and one in the middle. We'll go with these two first. If you could wait for the mic.
Yeah, okay. Hi, thanks very much. Fraser Miles from the MOD. What do you find to be the biggest barriers in achieving security accreditation for these systems? Certainly up to the likes of IL3 and IL4 you've spoken about. And what are you doing with, in terms of engaging with other government departments to address those issues?
Okay, I guess that's one for you to begin with, Peter.
That's very good questions. I think, firstly, we've got a dedicated lead on security issues to work with our security services and to work with the new guidance coming out. I mean, there's a lot of movement in that space with all the new protective marketing scheme coming out. So there's a whole strand on trying to understand the policy and help influence the policy from a program perspective. I think then, you know, from our discussions with the department, we're trying to follow best practice on information security. I mean, we say you need to be aware of the risks that around the data and the services that you're using. You have to understand the policies internal to your department, and you have to understand the residual risks of using anything that's in the public cloud, and the processes that we're putting in place are hopefully trying to make that as easy as possible for you to understand what you can buy in the cloud store and what the residual risks are going to be. I think we'd like to do more from an engagement perspective. I know that one of the most visited areas of the website is around accreditation. So we're suggesting that we can do perhaps some technical workshops to flush out some of these issues from a program perspective. So if that's something that we could do, say, for MOD, then we'd be happy to come in and do that with our sort of security lead.
So there's the other barriers to adoption. 75% of the suppliers are SMEs. Some of them may have not have come across the need within government. So from our perspective, getting your designs right is quite new to some of the suppliers. They haven't thought about it before, certainly at IL3 and above. You know, you've really got to start from the very basics. Their awareness of accreditation and the issues involved is not great, but we're involving ourselves with other suppliers, some of the bigger suppliers who have experience in this. They've got their own communities of suppliers, and we're working with them to say, look, if there's something you can do for those suppliers, for your little group, we'd encourage you to do it. Help them with their architecture, help them with their awareness, help them with their terms and conditions, help them with partnering with other people, certainly for software as a service, for instance. There's already people who've got the hosting accredited at IL3 layers. So, you know, they can reduce the amount of effort they have to put in by partnering in this ecosystem of suppliers. And there's plenty of big suppliers doing this sort of thing. And CASG, you know, it's pretty standard. They've got good information now. And we can only see it growing as more and more services get accredited regularly. It's a focus for us. We know the public sector want it, they need it. And hopefully we're seeing a bigger increase in awareness and an ecosystem approach to security.
What about from a sort of supplier side? How do you tend to address that sort of issue?
The only thing I was going to add is just from your perspective, being able to, from the supplier perspective, being able to engage with people in your organisation who have the time and commitment to put to an engagement to understand fully what you need, particularly above IL2, IL3 and above, so that we can very quickly understand. Often we find it's getting that speed and depth of engagement early enough to really understand the need that's the problem. So I think the only thing I think is just from a supplier perspective, it's getting that engagement that's critical with the right people and getting the commitment from, as I say, an MOD type organisation to put the people into it and get that dialogue going. I think that's the biggest thing we would want.
Just to keep everyone up to date, Dave, you're from the Cabinet Office as well, aren't you?
Yeah, Dave Denton, that's, we work together.
Okay, thanks. Gentleman in the middle, your question, please.
Hi, I'm Mark Phillips from Education. I think this is for David Light initially, though even what you were just talking about there touches on it. David, you said that you start a conversation with suppliers from the off, and also that procurement principles apply. And I'm kind of thinking there's a tension there, because if you're having a natter with a supplier, you also said that you've kind of got to keep that level playing field. So it's how do you engage at that sort of dialogue level and yet retain those procurement principles such that the same sort of conversation, it would be a bit laborious, I think, to record the details of your conversation and then play it back to the next person, which is where I see procurement principles. So it's that tension, and how do you dispel it?
Okay, so I think I was meaning about engaging with the market collectively starts earlier on by the fact that the supplier has written a service description on the cloud store, and you're able to see that at an early stage, and so you're engaging with that and evaluating that. Whereas in the traditional approach, you would work up an ITT and you would send it out to the framework, and then the framework would respond at whatever point. So the benefit is that you're getting ahead of the game by evaluating things early. But it is, and the procurement rules and the procurement principles point is that you're fair to, so you've cast your net, you've said, I want to know about these services. You've got sort of 20 hits. Then you can refine those down to, so I'm ruling them out because they don't meet the requirement. And I've got 5 suppliers here who I think could be capable. And then you have the same discussion. So you would say, this is our requirement. In our case, I asked for a project brief that says this is what we're wanting to do. And you told us this in your service description. Based on our project brief, is there anything more you can tell us? For instance, what is your implementation approach? What is your volume pricing? So it's about it's about getting ahead of the game, but being consistent in the approach you're taking.
Well, I think from our perspective, what we say to buyers is that the services are fixed at point of tender, so they can't turn around and tell you something else. So this is an important point that you've got to remember. You can only buy what's on the cloud store. So that actually helps orchestrate a different type of dialogue, because both sides know that you can't be sold something different. And it's really then about understanding how that's going to work for you. And I think the feedback we get from buyers is that they find that very useful. And I think then it's just, when does that kick in? And I think that probably kicks in around the shortlisting stage, where you've gone through and filtered out the ones that you really don't think are a good fit. And then you can have that dialogue, understand, fill in some of the gaps. And hopefully as the cloud store gets better and the service, so the information on there gets better, you probably need to have less of that. But don't feel discouraged about going to talk to suppliers once you get to that sort of shortlisting phase, because it will be very helpful. And ask them to come in, give them a presentation, because by that process you will learn things, even if it's about what your own needs are, and that's an important point.
So it's kind of legitimate to jump straight into clarification on the basis.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's what you do.
Yeah. The key point is everybody's been included in the tender. Yeah. Everybody's had the ability to put their service offering in. Now, when you're searching on the cloud store, some suppliers may have done a really good job and the information might be available to you, so you don't need to ask them questions. Somebody else, however, you might not be so clear, or if you've got a 404, you might say, well, I want the best outcome for my organisation, so I'll go and ask them for the information. That's not being unfair, they've both had the opportunity, and you've said, can you tell me some more? Now, if you'd have sat there and gone and planned out a big specification for something, then that obviously is not being fair, but you can ask them. And then, as Peter said, you move from that gathering information, the evaluation stage, into the shortlisting. You've paid some more attention, you've gone into more detail, and you can gather information from their service definition, from their websites. There's more things you can do. G-Cloud gives you a really open and agile way of approaching it, depending on your project. So it's a refreshing change from having to follow things to the letter, to the T, and not making any mistakes. The O2's been done. They've all had the same opportunity to put their service offerings in place. So then when you get into the shortlisting phase, you can engage. You don't have to engage with anybody. You can place an order without absolutely talking to a supplier. But is that going to get you the best outcome? At that point, you can get somebody in, give them a business scenario, as you said earlier. Can you please explain how you meet ours? What's your approach to doing business in this way? It's very, very flexible, very agile.
Okay, next questions, please. There's two at the back there. Go with the very back first.
All right. Paul Wilgos, Health and Safety Executive. Do you have any examples of where IL3 rated systems have actually been installed beyond trial at the moment? I'm aware of at least one department where it was getting close to implementation and the hosting companies dropped out, which means that full reaccreditation has to be done with a whole host of problems that brings. So a good example of where IL3 has actually been implemented would help calm some nerves.
Andrew, any hints on your side of the fence? No?
Well, practically, we don't have a case
You
study
don't, yeah.
IL3 reference at the
No,
moment. We have an IL3 situation we're working on, but it's not something publicly announced. I mean, in terms of more broadly in the market,
No market gossip to
no, I'm not. It's probably inappropriate in fairness, because I wouldn't necessarily have awareness of everything going on, nor would you expect it in fairness. I can't think of any live IL3 services, but there may well be.
Let's say if there had been one, we would have crowed about it, right? So obviously it's not happened yet, but we definitely do have that in the pipeline. There are big departments looking right now at implementing IL3 services, whether that's document management, compute, hosting, storage. There's a whole range of stuff going through. When that award will be made and we go public with it, and it's difficult to say because sometimes we just don't know until that happens, because we don't have the data feeds that tell us when this is happening.
At the moment,
So now that we know it, there's a huge expectation. I think we will tweet about it, we'll make a blog and do some hullabaloo.
And I think, I mean, probably maybe stating the obvious, but at IL3 certainly, and I guess above that definitely, what I would call the sales cycle, but it's maybe not right, but there's the length of time it takes an organisation to move from the concept to delivery is significantly longer, at least at the moment. That's what we see, just because there's far more to be worked out. And that goes back to the point I made earlier, from a supplier perspective, the deeper and earlier the engagement is with you, the better. Again, I'm not an IL3 expert, whether we have people here today I think who are, but I think my reading of IL3 is it's not quite as straightforward as IL2. There is certainly a lot more tailoring, if you like, that needs to be done for your organisation. So I think it's that deep and early engagement that's critical to success.
we've only recently had a number of IL3 services just been accredited, which is there's a lot of activity from the buyers. Can we have have we got the services available? And pan-government accreditation is what the G-Cloud gives, but there are other providers who have the IL3 services, but because of the way things are reported at the moment, it's mainly due to the supplier and the buying organisation. It's not the services involved, and we're trying to change that, which makes things much easier for us when we answer these questions, because we'll have a list of them. We just know that this supplier is provided to this buyer, and therefore we don't know at what level it's gone down to.
Okay, if you could just pass the mic forward one. Anyone else who's got a question, we can get the mic up here ready, then we can.
Hi, Ty Mance for the MOD. I'm interested in contract length times, especially with moving larger ERP systems onto the cloud. It seems that would be a continuous transition process of transitioning on and transitioning off as the contracts come to an end. How would it be avoided?
Contract call-off lengths of 24 months, you mean? That's a good one. I think, first of all, I mean, Dave, chip in. I think the way this we want this to work, is we're not going to necessarily force you to change provider at the end of the call-off. I think what you have to do at the end of a call-off is go back to the marketplace and find and check whether the market has moved on, because in 2 years, I mean, look what we've done in 1 year. In 2 years, things could have shifted enormously. So I think it's great practice to get people to go back and see where the market is, what new entrants have come on, if the prices have gone down, if the terms have become favourable. And that process isn't just about saying, well, we're going to shift at the end of it. It's about actually making the marketplace work as a whole, because suppliers know that you're going to go back, their competitors know that you're going to have to go back at the end of it. And that whole process of transparency is going to drive competition. At the end of it, when you go back to the marketplace, you may come out at the end of it with the same answer, and the same supplier may still be able to provide the best value, because you need to build in to that evaluation process any transition costs. So we have to be careful not to fudge that process, but we need to maintain that mechanism, because we think that's a key way of driving that competition and transparency.
It's not mandatory, you know. It's a sort of a misconception, because it's 24 months. You have to go and find somebody else. You don't. All it's saying is it's a maximum of 24 months for one contract, but it's your opportunity to move should you need it. The suppliers, if they're doing a good job for you, then the chances are you'll want to stay with them. Your criteria for selecting through the G-Cloud is either via lowest price or by MEET, most economically advantageous tender. And that says whole life costs. Well, if whole life costs have got transition, integration costs, if you're happy with your incumbent, they provide a good service at the levels you're expecting, then you'll penalise heavy integration and onboarding costs. So it doesn't mean you can't stay with that supplier. It just means you've got an opportunity to change and be flexible and adaptive. And also, people are taking out different models of selecting suppliers. They might have, rather than one provider providing all their hosting, they might have a number to provide organizational resilience or appropriate solutions for different hosting needs. What it means is you've got the ability and the flexibility built into the way you procure, rather than big contract, 5 years, taken care of, forget about it. It's a new approach. You can flex, you're going to be agile, and you can respond to the changing needs of your business and to the market.
And the supplier's price. So if you're stuck with a supplier for 2 years, that they have to give you their best price for those services going forwards. So they can't sort of get you for 2 years and then put their price up for you, because that would mean they would get no other business from the market.
Exactly. Some people talk about lock-in. I'm locked in with them. Well, with some big projects, you know, you might take a year or more to get actually on fully embedded into a contract with a supplier. We understand that. It's not that easy to shift. So people say, well, you might be tied into them. Well, if they tied into you, if they try to tie you in with high costs, they wouldn't get any more business. It's not in their interest to have high costs in the G-Cloud for just one customer. They want to be competitive. It's all open. It's all transparent. The prices should be low. They should be competitive. And if you've built your organisation well and your contracts well, you should be able to go with the best prices and the solutions that suit you.
The other thing I think it does, and I think one of the presentations mentioned it, is with very long contracts, I'm guessing it can be on occasions easy to lose sight of what you've actually got. Whereas with a short contract, it may not say something that you welcome, but it does put an emphasis back on you as the end client to really keep an eye on what's being provided, so you can, if you do need to transition out, you can transition out. So, I mean, going back to one of the themes I think of this morning, it's giving you control. And so, you know, I think the example was about paying for a floor of desktop PCs that you didn't have. Similar thing in cloud, I think the comments made you could be paying for servers you don't need and things. So I think it is you're getting control out of it, but obviously the responsibility with you to just probably manage more tighter on what you're getting than perhaps you have with, say, a 5 or 10 year contract of the past.
I don't know if this question, David, you might be best placed to answer, but I'll welcome comments from anyone. It's around looking at the existing services, the legacy services, and trying to disaggregate to try and shop in the cloud. I mean, have you got any tips, advice on how to approach that?
So we are, we can discontinue services. We're also discussing with IBM, our supplier, how they can deliver, whether it's G-Cloud services or, because I think an SI can buy from the cloud, can't they?
Well,
or there's lots of models. So IBM could potentially buy from the cloud, or we could buy from the cloud and say, this is a service we want you to deliver to us. And that would sort of fall into, we have a lot of test and dev environments that are used when they're used and then setting idle when they're not. So we're looking at what we can move to cloud services, whether we do that aggressively and say, well, we're discontinuing those services and we're letting this and you get on with it, or at the moment it's in discussions with, give us cloud type services that we only pay for what we consume.
I mean, I would say you've got about 1,200 cloud support services on Block 4. Many of those are designed to help you answer that question, help you transition plan, understand your estate, which bits would be the best to sort of disaggregate and the sort of time for that. So there are experts, and that's their job, and you can buy that in on the same basis as the other services, so on a commodity basis. So.
Was there an answer to the question about can the SI go to the cloud?
it's only, public sector can only buy through the framework, but because it's all open and transparent, all the suppliers can see each other's prices, and it is, we have heard of stories where suppliers have said, I've seen that on there, can I buy it from you? We've had software providers partnering with hosting providers provide their SaaS products, for instance. They can't buy through the framework, but they'll buy the G-Cloud services because they've seen them there at the prices.
Okay, we have a question here, and then I think we have a question here as well. So, would you go first?
Paula Wright, Minister of Defence, Online Policy Officer. It has been highlighted that cloud contracts are multi-tenancy with more risk and less control for the client. Does private cloud take multi-tenancy completely away from that equation? And if not, to what extent is the risk and the loss of control mitigated?
It's one for Andrew.
Oh, thank you.
You're the expert.
Well, I wish I was the expert. I mean, I think our view would be that as much as you've always got to focus on what you need to achieve at the end of the day. It's a bit of a glib comment, but if your need dictates that you have security requirements and business needs, that it should be a private cloud, and then that should be the way you go down. But what you should look at, and it feeds on, I think, from the cloud first perspective. The first port of call should be, with the business need I've got, can I do that with a multi-tenanted system? Can I do it with, building blocks? And the answer at various points, again, might be no. We just cannot take that risk. It comes back to the point that was made in the risk assessment. So I think, again, it comes down to the point I made earlier. It's all about that deep and early engagement. Understand your problem, what you're trying to deliver, engage with suppliers, engage internally with government teams, understand what your risks, understand which risks you can mitigate, understand which risks are core, and that will drive your decision. And I'm sure you can probably get advice internally from the government teams, and you can certainly get advice from suppliers. I mean, we spend a lot of our time talking to organisations about how they can use cloud. And I think, as most people say, cloud's not one thing. I think the car analogy is a good one. Everybody will. A lot of organisations could end up with their own cloud requirement, taking core solutions but building around that to make sure they do their business case. I don't know if it answers the question, but I think private cloud could be the right solution for what you need based on that risk and business criteria you do.
And you can arrange private cloud services
Yeah,
through
absolutely. Yeah, each provider will provide different types. With the private, you can have on-premise, off-premise, and they might be separated technologically, i.e. just network separated, or they could be physically. Each provider will have their own private cloud offering. It's best to engage with them. You'll find them on the G-Cloud, and they'll have different IL levels for you as well. So, get on there, find out what's there.
And in hybrid as well, you can get hybrid models.
And then the good thing is, even if you go for a private model, which always I think conjures up in people's heads, or big dollar signs and that kind of stuff, the reality is it probably will be more expensive, but still through Cloud Store you have the ability to compare, enter competitive dialogue and those sort of things. So although you may end up with a more expensive solution because that's right for your business need, you still have through the process the opportunity to keep, if you like, suppliers honest, so you don't end up with the sort of the days of the past where you pay a huge price for something which you probably could have got a lot cheaper. So you still can follow the same rigor of process, you just end up with a solution for you.
The key is also to use the appropriate cloud for these services. Don't put everything in a private cloud because you won't get the economies of scale and the cost reductions you get with public offerings. They can still be secure, just engage with them, and find out what they offer and make sure you've got the right data or the right systems in the right cloud for you. And that's how you make your savings.
So we had a question in the middle, and then we've got... I think, well, this chap had the microphone first, so if you go first in the middle, and then you go next.
Chris Reynolds, I'm from the Ministry of Justice. You update the store every 6 months. That's should be giving improvements to everybody. Also comes with certain risks as you transition from one to the other.
Mm-hmm.
What were the main lessons you learned from moving from 1 to 2? And why is 3 going to be better for us?
Do you want me to answer that?
I think, well...
I know the obvious one. Make sure the overlap is bigger, but yeah, go on.
The first framework was an experiment. We didn't know who was going to... how many suppliers we were going to get, whether any we would buy from that. So we had to take the tool that was available to us, which was Proxer, which was a GPS tool that underpinned the marketplace. We didn't have the time or the resource to go and build something else. So it was a bit of an experiment. We did try to learn some lessons from G1 as we went into G2, build that into helping the suppliers, giving them guidance, doing what we call apply camps, things like that, trying to pick up on the feedback we've got saying the information isn't good enough, the prices are not good enough, the broken links issue that David mentioned. So we did what we could to try and give some advice and education, if you like, to suppliers. I think what we've learned is that still wasn't enough in the G2, because we still realised in G3 that there's a huge knowledge gap, and each time we get new suppliers on, we have to go through the whole thing again. So we have to do a bit of rethinking in that as well. I think in terms of G3, we've seen the marketplace mature a little bit. The suppliers are doing a lot more to look at their services on there. What we did find, I think, from the initial one, is that some suppliers didn't actually go on and check whether their service was there and the links were working, and that's not really sensible. We try to encourage a lot more interactivity with their ownership, if you like, using this as a marketing tool, the front page. We think that G3 will be better because of that maturity. We think the marketplace is going to grow again, hopefully by a significant amount, but we can't be sure. And when the new cloud store comes along, the process that will be much more aligned to the buying process, and the searching will be much easier, the shortlisting will be much easier, the audit trail will be much easier to be able to print out things with your shortlist and then share that in a much easier way. So hopefully a lot of benefits.
Yeah, well, from a buyer perspective, G-Cloud 1 to G-Cloud 2 was quite difficult because of the short overlap between the opening of one and the closing of another, 6 months. What that meant was if you were in the middle of buying, it closed down, you had to restart again. Now with the overlap of 6 months, you've got 6 months to make a judgment call. We'd advise anybody, as soon as, if you're in a G2 procurement now and it's not going to be done before April, as part of your, trying to get best value out of your contracts, do another search. You've already got the search criteria, go and have another look on G3, see if there's any better offerings, any more competition, lower prices. That 6 months allows you the flexibility of planning well in advance and avoiding any of the sudden stops that we had for G1. That won't happen again. We're smart to that now, and it'll be much easier for the buyers. As for what Peter was saying, it was new to the suppliers, G1. They weren't to be honest, there's still some that haven't cottoned on. There's a different channel. People aren't going to knock your door and ask you for presentations. They are going to, your offering, your sales mechanism is there on the cloud store. We as a team have tried to increase that knowledge amongst the suppliers and say, there's a buying process, are you aligned to it? As your information matching what they need? Are you making it easier for them? What's the perception that customers getting from you right from the offset? And a lot of suppliers are getting this now. They're understanding, oh, you know, people will judge you from the very first, the name of your service. You know, having something there that's a 0 or a 1, or something, people aren't used to it. And what's this? You don't compare well with other people. Some suppliers haven't got it, some have. And our message is continuing. The suppliers will get smarter, they'll get better entries, and hopefully it'll be better for the buyers.
Oh, hello. I hope that this is not too unsophisticated, but I'm thinking about the very, very, very end user involvement and trying to avoid the situation where the very, very end user is presented with a fait accompli and some product or commodity or whatever it is without being consulted. And is there any way of avoiding that, of getting everybody involved to make sure it's what they actually want and they can use?
Yeah, I'll take that one because it ties in very much with the approach that we're taking for DEFRA now. Basically, one of the concerns that we had with the traditional style delivery was really the fact that what happens is that your supplier delivers a solution without necessarily involving the end user. So the approach that we've actually taken is very much to engage suppliers that are going to work really well with our small groups within the business. So that end user does effectively have a stake in what's delivered and understands very clearly what that solution will be. Effectively, they work with us to frame the solution, so there's not that remoteness. And so they're not going to get a service that isn't necessarily going to meet their needs. They're going to get something that they've got a real stake in.
Does that cost more to have that sort of service?
No, it actually costs a lot less with the approach that we're taking, because what we're not doing is spending all our money up front on one large sophisticated solution for the whole of the network. What we're doing is buying a small solution and a small amount of time for delivery. So what we do is we scope up that solution and work with a small percentage of business users. So we're talking, you know, tens of thousands of pounds as opposed to hundreds of thousands of pounds, but short, limited, time-boxed periods to enable us to design something which could be used elsewhere, it could be grown, but if it doesn't work, we say, okay, we haven't spent a lot of money, we haven't bet the farm, we'll stop that and we'll try something else.
Mm-hmm. I think what we also see are some of the buyers trying out solutions, so you can try solutions before you buy them, particularly in the software as a service, and building the end user's experiences of those trials into the evaluation process. So you, for example, a local authority has looked at 3 collaboration tools and trialed those for a month with their end users and then made their decision based on that feedback as part of building that into the business process of every day. So we think that this really does lend itself to engagement with end users much more than say, a traditional model.
So you won't necessarily have signed at that time. I mean, you know, how far people can try.
I think that will come down to
users can try out different solutions.
That will come down to the way your organisation runs projects and the culture of engagement. We are encouraging people on the outset to collaborate with the different teams involved and get them involved from the outset. So, you know, that's
They're often a bit busy, and there's the thing of continuity, isn't it, really?
There is. But it's easier to do that sort of engagement, I think, with the cloud.
Yeah, so in our experience, you could offer something. Some of these people do offer a sandpit, a trial version. You don't even have to buy. You know, they'll say, here, go to this link if you just have a play with it. So that's quite useful.
We're asking organisations, you've got the cloud, it's ICT, it's flexible, it's agile. You've got G-Cloud, which has got agile and flexible procurement, and then you've got your organisations. and we say, are they agile? Are they flexible themselves? You're used to working in a certain way. You can go back to basics. Some of the project teams, instead of spending an awful lot of time up front doing the requirements management or definitions, you can sit there with your users literally on the first day in the first workshop and say, well, let's search the cloud store and try and identify some candidate services and then sign up for them. Some of them you can have them instantly, some of them the next day. By the end of the week, you could be coming back to your next meeting with some real tangible, evidential learning and experience of what's out there and what you might want. Certainly for when your business is trying to innovate and we think we need this, what can we do with it? You can be experiencing it within a matter of hours or days, whereas previously you might have spent 3 months trying to wrap it up into a business case or, it's much
lots of vigorous head nodding going on.
Yeah, it's such an opportunity, but the organisation has to take hold of that, not G-Cloud and not the suppliers. Your organisation has to adapt and say, what do we have to do differently to get the best out of G-Cloud?
Okay. Any other questions? Is that what all over here?
Are there risks in G-Cloud that we haven't talked about today? We've talked a bit about some. Barry talked about some of the risks in his brief presentation this morning. But are there risks that we haven't talked about? And if so, what can be done to mitigate them?
Well, I've got one possible risk question. Some buyers are asking me, say, well, what happens when everybody chooses one supplier to deliver the services? How do we manage that? You need to be able to police the suppliers on the framework so that you ensure that not too much business goes to one supplier. And I don't know the answer to that question.
Bring it on, I say.
And I don't know whether, from a supplier's perspective, you see that as an issue or a risk that you need to mitigate, and how would you mitigate that? If this whole room came to you next week to say, bring it on, how would you deal with
Well,
that?
I think my answer to that would be, I've talked about it in other sessions the last 6 months, as an SME, it may be different for big suppliers, by the way, but for an SME, you can't afford failure, and you can't afford to spend a lot of time on things that ultimately you can't deliver. So again, going back to the point I made earlier about early, deep engagement, it's in our interest to get that early, deep engagement, so we can tell you that we can't do this for you. It's not us. We have things that can get you part of the way there. So I would put it the other way around. I think the value of CloudStor to us as a small supplier is, one, it helps enable that engagement, and we've certainly seen that engagement increase over the last 12 months, but it also helps us make a very open and pragmatic decision through dialogue with you as the client to say, well, thanks for coming to us, but in this case we can't do it. And we've turned away quite a few opportunities in the last 6 months because of that. So as much as Steve and me probably like all the business, in reality is we want business that helps us be successful and ultimately obviously makes your business case successful. So I don't know if that answers the question really, that's my kind of
I
slant.
think it does. I mean, whether we need to police it or not, I don't know.
I think it'll naturally police itself, unless suddenly someone buys the whole market. But naturally, I think it should.
I think there are some risks. Organisationally, you've got governance in place for your procurement, your ICT, projects and programmes. There is a risk that you lose control. People go and buy these services themselves, they find out about it. So there's also a risk that if you're not joined up within your own teams, that people will buy the same solution from different providers and it makes it more complex to run it. So it comes back again, the organisation has to mature itself and really align itself to this procurement process to get the best out of it and to manage the risks associated with that. There's also the terms and conditions. So people, if they're not careful, previously functional fit, well, this fits me functionally, great, I'll go and buy it, and they've missed something. Terms and conditions, they move forward a bit. The suppliers, the service levels, they're associated with their services, they come up a bit because the difference between a 99.5 and a 99.95 is quite a lot in terms of the value you get in terms of your availability. So there are risks if the organisation isn't, but Peter and I and the team, we work really hard to try and bring those risks to the attention of the buyers to make sure that they're thinking about the right things and they've got the processes in place for the different kinds of projects they're running, from the big to the very small and agile.
Another question?
One last thing. It addresses your point of risk, and I think you're certainly all evangelists, and probably we are because we're here, and yet this is a core platform for Cabinet Office's way of doing IT business in the future. And the risk is that it doesn't catch critical mass and just drops off the edge. How do we collectively address that? You're a very small team.
We are a very small team.
We must represent 0.0001% of civil service.
Yeah.
But I think it's right, really, that it starts that way. We're a small team, so if we're too successful with our tools at a certain stage, we've run the project in an agile fashion. So we didn't have the best tools in place and everything there to start off with. So we had to grow it. And if we'd have got to 29,000 organisations, and within each organisation, the IT teams, the information assurance teams, procurement, finance, projects and programmes, we could have been overwhelmed. That would have made us fail, okay? So us growing this critical mass, we're growing as a unit, we've got champions on board, we're proving the case, we're getting real great examples, we're getting more and more steam. It's in line with our agile improvement, our tool sets are getting better, the way we engage with customers is getting better, and the way we engage with suppliers is getting better. Intellect and the ecosystems that are coming. I think it's going at the right pace at the moment. Too much, too soon, we fail. Not enough, as you say, the critical mass, we die out, we fail. But at the moment, I'm quite confident we're on track.
I'm sure that's right, it's just registering that.
No, it is a risk, you're right.
I was going to say, I think there's also a huge commitment and responsibility on suppliers. I mean, the fundamental thing that will make it work is the relationship between the likes of us and you. If there's lots of horror stories over the next 24 months of things bought through G-Cloud that haven't delivered, then that will be an issue. So I fundamentally think for an organisation like EduServe and other people on the cloud store, it is about making sure we deliver with you in partnership. The cliche words, but that's the reality of what needs to happen. Bring out those cases, and if that happens, then hopefully your point about it being just evangelist at the moment, it will become mainstream. And the point I made in my presentation, I think the success is when we no longer talk about Cloud Store. When we don't have to events like this, then success is there because we'll just be using it naturally as a way of doing business.
I mean, I think, as I said, we're doing the best we can to make it work. Industry needs to do their bit, and we've certainly seen the evidence of that from the likes of EduServe. There are others that could probably do more, but I think they're catching on. And honestly, I think we'll probably see that the tipping point is actually not that far away, given the impact that we see not just within the cloud, the cloud store and what people are buying, but the way it's impacted the rest of the marketplace. So let's hope. Look, time will tell.
Andrew or David, do you have any thoughts on risks from the departmental, or that you've had feedback from your organisation when you were working with?
Not any that I can think of that we haven't covered already, to be quite honest. David, have you?
No, I think I'd say the same.
Covered them.
Any other questions arising from that last section of discussion? Yep, one here.
Could I just ask a bit about the risk of supplier failure? Because I deal with a fairly small number of large suppliers, so I can get annual reports, Dun & Bradstreet, Google Alerts, and with a small team, you can track them. If in sort of 2 years' time I've now got 100 SMEs delivering similar services, the likelihood is that one or two of those will fail, and you've put customer-facing, critical type services out into the cloud. So is that something that the Cloud Store team will be managing, or is that something that we would have to look at ourselves?
SIAM services really for us, isn't it? It's the model that was put up earlier on today. Having that you can buy in resource that will help you manage your services in that sort of pipe manner. The SIAM model is sort of taking off quite strongly, and as you diversify your portfolio, the complexity increases, and you'll have to manage that accordingly. Whether your contract management skills, whether it be employing somebody to do that for you, it's a challenge. But if you weigh it up against the potential benefits of doing it this way, and the agility and the ability to swap things in and out, having the life cycle of your ICT in alignment with your contracts, whereas previously you attach them all to other things and they move so slowly. So this will hold back the innovation and the movement in one area. I think the benefits far outweigh it. But you're quite right, it's a challenge. That's why with each iteration of the G-Cloud we try and go to the next level, and we're doing that with the SIAM services, the identity services this time. It's just the evolution. As people understand the challenges of the cloud, the solutions will come in. The suppliers as well, they're not soft. they will come and provide the services we need to make this work. I'm convinced of it.
Any other questions? I think that's a point that's come up again and again, is service integration. And
It
new
is,
side
yeah.
of
I
the-
mean, we've done quite a lot to try and engage with the market and stimulate the market. So it's not just about being passive. We've done events to say, look, these are our needs in service integration, service management. Come back with commodity-based services to help us deal with these. And we're hoping that G3 will have a whole range of new SIAM type services on there that aren't there on G2. So we'll have to wait and see, but we're quite hopeful.
I think there's possibly a whole further seminar in how departments rise to that challenge and make those kind of
I think there is.
points
I mean,
work
I
as
think the whole how we deal with complex service management issues is a piece on its own, and we've got some good examples in the Home Office that are working through that. Department for Education are working through some of those issues. So the next part of our maturity is to really bring some of that back to the table and say, well, this is what we're doing, this is how we've done it, how do we get through some of those difficult challenges.
And share it, yeah, you're right.
Share it.
Yeah.
This time next year, that's the sort of event that we'd like to see.
We've got DEFRA sharing here, but really we need the community to start sharing amongst themselves. You're all going through this. Work out loud is one of our phrases we use, because there might be somebody a week behind you, and if you can save them making a mistake that you made or learn from a lesson that you've gleaned, then we share it. We've got communities already in the Knowledge Hub, and if you can use it to tell your stories, and you can use it to ask your questions. There's so many answers amongst you all the different organisations, the public sector. It's new to everybody. It's new to the suppliers, it's new to the buyers, so we should just be sharing and solving the problems amongst us, which is different. We're usually used to going through it and we'll have a big lessons learned and wrap it up at the end of it. With cloud, you don't need to do that. You need to do it right now, share it now, because somebody wants to follow, whether they're buying a CMS, buying hosting, web hosting. We get it all the time, don't we, Peter? You know anybody who's done this? Know anybody who's done that? Use our communities, share your stories, ask your questions, and eventually everybody will start helping one another. It's a whole new way.
I did think about mentioning that, the Knowledge Hub, because we've used it, and it's been very useful just to say, we're thinking of buying such and such service. Anyone know if anyone's offering it? And it would be useful to circulate that email address.
Yeah,
web
I
address.
think with the new cloud store,
Yeah.
we're hoping that we're going to make that much more integrated anyway to the sort of whole experience, and you can join in and share when you do your other activities on the cloud store. So we'll hopefully get something better.
Okay. Just that we are edging towards lunch, which you're all very excited about. Stephen, would you like to say a few words in close?
Very briefly. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for engaging so tremendously this morning. You were saying only 0.0001%, I think, was your statistic of the civil services here this morning. Okay, but if you think about the collective budgets, IT budgets, that your organisations are responsible for, it'll certainly run into hundreds of millions of pounds, if not billions of pounds. So anything that helps get better value for money out of that substantial spend is enormously worthwhile. We've heard today about what is, I think, still the start of a journey in terms of G-Cloud and Cloud Store. We've heard about where we are now. I think, incidentally, there is stuff, going back to something that Peter said right at the beginning, there's stuff going through because of G-Cloud that isn't appearing in the stats, because people are being introduced through G-Cloud as a kind of dating agency without it being the formal method of procurement. So I think there's more happening there than is showing up in the stats, but I'm quite sure the stats are going to be transformed over the next year. And I think the most important thing is that all the kind of issues that came up during the question and answer session are issues that, as we've been saying, we continue to progress, whether through events like this or smaller informal get-togethers. I'm enormously grateful to all our speakers, both being given difficult questions on the hoof in the last session or in their presentation. So join me please in thanking them. Thank you very much.
Lunch is served downstairs where you registered and had your coffee to begin with. So you have lunch, continue the conversations. Thank you all for coming.